I'll start the shebang. Well, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
On behalf of the Georgia Association of Home Inspectors, I appreciate your attendance and being here today in our initiation of a program that we spent probably in the range of about a year and a half developing, dealing predominantly for the real estate industry, for realtors, and focusing on home inspections. I want to introduce myself and my associate Richard Smith. Richard and I are both board members of the Georgia Association of Home Inspectors. We have collectively probably 35 years experience in the home inspection industry and thousands of houses in the process. Richard holds the position of president-elect of the association. He will become president of the association beginning this next year coming up. I am the immediate past president. Our current president is Mike Parkman. GAHI is, to start off with the process here, give me a second here to, we want to cover a variety of things today. And just to give you a beginning outline, we're going to say, why you need a home inspection. And on home inspection on new construction, that's one of the public questions. We're going to talk about a brief history of the Georgia building codes and the ICC. We're going to talk about who the ICC is and who the DCA is. Some of you probably are not familiar with the DCA, but we'll talk about what that is. We'll talk about who the Georgia Association of Home Inspectors, who they are, and a little bit of background on them. We're going to talk about other inspector organizations briefly, and we're going to talk about what an inspection covers, limitations, types of inspections, and then we'll have in that a summary. In addition, we'll talk about in the process of the standards of practice, which there is a standards of practice for all home inspectors to adhere to. We'll talk about HVAC, mechanical, plumbing, electrical. You can read through all the things that are listed there. The last thing that says other issues, should we have time at the end of this, we'll also touch on those elements because those tend to be a little more specialized from the standard process of a home inspection. So, why is there a need to have a home inspection? A home inspection is typically the largest investment your client makes in their lifetime in most call cases. An inspection can save you money in the long run. So what does that mean? It means that if you do an inspection on a pre-sale property, if you're going to, before you list the property or the property being listed, have the property inspected, you then get the opportunity to see before an inspector comes in from the buyer side of it to know what issues there are there and probably what you want your client, at least at that level, to look at, address, and deal with. It also provides a potential selling tool. It reduces problems and stress simply because you're doing it on the front end as opposed to being pushed to it on the back end of the process, and that's more typically what happens on the back end of the process. Your client makes a bid, then the seller has to deal with whatever they agree to work with after the inspection process. An inspection creates a separation of liability between you and the seller. That's probably one of the bigger points right there, because at that point the inspector is coming in and assuming the responsibility of evaluating the property and telling you what kind of conditions that are there. Some that are small, some that may not be small. And obviously those that are not small are the ones that cost real money. And approximately 1 out of 10 properties have significant issues. This probably has more to do with new constructions and significant issues. I mean, I have yet to look at a new property that didn't have a problem or where there's a failure in a code issue. But in any case, the older the house, the greater the opportunity for condition issues to be there. Why do I need a construction inspection? Probably one of the most common things that people ask us is, it's a new property. The county is going to come through and look at it. Why do I need to pay somebody else to come through and look at the property? Standards of practice for new construction. This applies to both framing and pre-drywall inspections and finished properties. Probably the most common inspection process for new construction is what's called a two-phase. Done hundreds of them. Larry Parkman, who I'm sure many of you probably already know Larry, as well as Richard, we all do what's called phase inspections on new properties, which simply means that we come in most commonly at what's called a pre-drywall. Everything's put in place before drywall covers everything up. And then we do an inspection of that. And then the second phase of it obviously is the finished inspection. GAHI members, Georgia Association of Home Inspectors, are required to cite code deficiencies. So I'm sure all of you have probably worked at some point in time with a builder who says, if I'm going to have a private inspector come in, he has to be code knowledgeable. Because he doesn't want somebody come in who doesn't really understand or know what the code is and starts citing stuff that isn't necessarily pertinent to what he's citing. And I'll tell you that that does happen. And we'll kind of get into that in a short distance here. Codes are key to any inspector. If your inspector doesn't know code, he shouldn't be getting out of his truck and telling you what's wrong with the house. If he doesn't understand to know what code standards are. So, what are codes and where do they come from? 1991 is when the state of Georgia first established a statewide mandated code system. 1991. Codes did exist prior to that, but they were left to the various counties and municipalities wherever a permit was issued for that to be managed. The codes were out there, they were scattered, they were very varied in a number of ways. In 1991, Georgia adopted what's called CABO. Who's heard of CABO? Everybody's probably heard CABO, the term. All right, it's Council of American Building Officials. CABO ended 15 years ago, by the way. CABO doesn't exist. The IRC residential section of the adopted, okay. The IRC, or the ICC residential section of the adopted 2000 effective 2001. Okay, let me tell you what that is. The ICC basically is where CABO essentially became absorbed into. It went through several train changes from 1991 up until 2000. Georgia adopted the IRC 2000. IRC is a national, there's a lot of acronyms in this, by the way, as you probably already know. The IRC is International Residential Code, the ICC is International Code Council. But in 2000, Georgia adopted the IRC 2000 for residential, because that's where we're focusing, is residential. It became effective 2001, that was the effective date. Residential codes constructions use the IRC International Residential Code, and that's the portion that we're basically going to be focusing on. IRC consists of structural, mechanical, plumbing, and electrical. This is the last printed copy of the IRC that I bought. I don't buy them printed anymore, I always buy them. This is a code book for 2006. 2012 didn't change a whole lot, but every 3 years the IRC updates its code systems and makes subtle changes based upon a variety of reasons from various evaluation and engineering agencies, because these things do change from time to time. Georgia only uses the structural and mechanical codes out of the IRC. This book has 4 sections in it. Structural, which basically is just about half the book. It has a section of mechanical and fuel gas codes, which Georgia uses. When it comes to plumbing and electrical, Georgia defers to the IPC, the International Plumbing Code, and the NEC, which is the National Electrical Code. That's a political decision. Has nothing to do to say with what's in this book is not correct. It's just that for whatever the powers that be, for those particular agencies that have their own lobbyists in place, they encourage that the plumber only carries one book, the electrician only carries one book. Everything that's in this book for the IRC basically came out of the electrical, NEC, and the plumbing code. Georgia defers the International Plumbing Code, which I just stated here, and the NEC, the IPC, by the way, is constructed by the ICC, the International Code Council. They are the ones who construct the plumbing code. The electrical code, however, defers to the NFPA, the National Fire Prevention Association. They write the electrical codes. Okay, here we go. All right, who is the ICC? We talked about that. The ICC is the International Code Council. They're the largest organization compiling code standards. They don't write the codes in the specific form, because a lot of this comes from a multitude of engineering evaluation and assessment organizations. They put them together, and they're typically or frequently were referenced in the ICC code book and for the IRC. They deal also in energy code, land management, things of that nature. And Georgia does have an energy code requirement for construction as well. The DCA. DCA is the Department of Community Affairs. It is the division of the state government that says we examine, we look at these systems, we decide what we want to accept, we decide what we want to exempt, we decide what we want to adjust or amend. So, understanding now that an inspector who's not up to speed on this kind of stuff or is not qualified on this stuff can get himself in trouble pretty fast. So who is the Georgia Association of Home Inspectors? GAHI began in 1989 from a number of several inspectors. Larry's probably old enough to remember several of them that initially started this organization. They recognized that inspectors were not necessarily weren't focused on code. They were focused more on looking at things and issuing opinions. So opinions are just that. They don't necessarily have substance behind them. The code is the substance that comes behind those things. Okay. All members of the Georgia Association of Home Inspectors, all members of the Georgia Association of Home Inspectors have to be ICC R5 certified. That means they've taken a testing procedure from the ICC, that they are qualified and knowledgeable. They don't remember all these numbers. I mean, couldn't be. I know a guy who knows just about that whole entire book verbatim, and we all know who that is. My guy's back here. But they have to completed a testing procedure from the ICC to be code certified of what's called a combination inspector. An inspector can say he's certified, which simply means he may be certified in structural. Is probably one of the most common ones that someone who doesn't become an R5, they'll take a structural test. When it comes to the electrical test, is kind of where the shortcoming comes around. But all GAHI members has to have taken the 4 tests administered by the ICC, a third-party entity. They could care less about GAHI, they could care less about ASHI, they could care less about any other organization. And I don't mean that figuratively. They certainly want them and want their support. But GAHI is the only association, professional association in this industry that makes this requirement of its inspectors. The only, nationally. There is no, to our knowledge, no other professional association in the inspection industry that makes that requirement.
In the whole of the U.S.?
In the whole of the U.S. Okay.
Joe?
Did I skip something? Yeah, Mike, Larry.
So is code certification required to become licensed in the state of Georgia?
Okay. We will get to licensing and talk about licensing as well. Let's see. Okay. And the R5 is structural, mechanical, plumbing, and electrical. I said, oh, okay, well, you just told me that the electrical and the plumbing in this book, Georgia doesn't use. Well, that's true. But the ICC issues the certification, and you have to become knowledgeable of what's in here. And if you know what's in here, you pretty well know what's in the other two, because all of that comes from these. It's, like I said, it comes back to kind of a political issue as to who says that what book they have to carry. All right, they have to successfully completed, to be a part of the association, they also have to successfully completed a home inspector's examination. GAHI has an examination for people who want to be part of the association to help us to understand that they understand the methodology of inspecting a house. We accept, we have this art, we administer ourselves. There's also a national home inspector's exam. If someone has taken that particular exam process that basically ASHI also administers, we accept satisfactory completion of that process as well. They have to have a minimum of 250 fee-paid inspections that conform to a standards of practice supplied by the Georgia Association of Home Inspectors. 250 fee-paid inspections, and then they can be classified a full certified member of the association. We do have some tiered levels in our association. We have a beginning person who comes in is classified trained. They typically have upwards of about 50 home inspections that conform. Then we have another one that's called qualified, which means they've gone to 125. At 250 and beyond, then they conform, then they can be classified a full member of the association. So you can see these guys have to have some experience behind them.
So Joe?
Yes, ma'am.
So if they do not have 250, can they not use that designation?
Okay, the designation works this way. At 125 fee-paid inspections that by our evaluation conforms reasonably to the standards of practice. And the standards of practice covers a broad area, and every home doesn't have everything that's in the standards of practice. At 125, once that point, they then become available to use the GAHI label and name as a member of the association. Before that, they cannot do that. And we have found people trying to do that, and we have slapped their hands.
Does somebody actually look at the inspections they've done?
Yes.
To-
Yes, the procedure in this particular case is we have a membership committee, and someone who makes an application to us, the beginning level is applicant. Doesn't mean anything more than they filled out a form, maybe have taken a test, but probably are not ICC certified in any of the categories. But they've taken a methods test. They've also taken an ethics test. I mean, every association has an ethical standard that they want their members to be knowledgeable of and adhere to. Once they do that, then what happens is they tell, I've gotten to 50, fine, give me your list of 50, I'll pick 3 or 4 of them out. We look for particular types, new construction. Usually, new construction is going to be hard to do for a guy at a 50 level. At 125 level, likely, he may have at least a couple in there. But types of foundations, whether it's a crawl space, a basement, or a slab. And we look at those things in relationship to the codes of standard, codes of practice. And if they're in compliance, then we give them the approval to move to the next level. So that's the process. So who are other associations? I mean, I think everyone knows who ASHI is. ASHI is a national organization, been around a long time, have many members. They're a very large organization. They're ASHI members all over the state of Georgia. InterNACHI, a more recent organization, same thing. International Association of National Home Inspectors, Certified Home Inspectors. That's what all those letters mean in there. Okay, now, NAHI, and we've just recently been informed, I don't have this for an absolute, but NAHI has dissolved. NAHI, National Association of Home Inspectors, to our understanding, and I mean, I can't take this necessarily to the bank, but I've left this, we decided to leave this up here just from the standpoint of just saying we're not sure about them. None of those say to be a part of our association you have to know what code says. Okay, enough said. GAHI is the only, now it's kind of redundant in this case, but only a code certified organization focusing on Georgia code standards as well. Obviously, being in the state of Georgia, as I've commented, the IRC goes, it's a book of multiple standards in there. The state, and I'm sure Georgia's there are other states no different than Georgia when it comes to looking through this book and making their changes, things they accept, things they don't accept. And these things are readily available to you. On the Georgia StateGov.dca website, there is a list there that'll tell you what Georgia does, and Georgia does something every year. They modify something, they change something, they delete something, et cetera, and so forth. So, and we'll talk about a couple of things when we get further down into this, some significant changes that you need to be aware of.
Joe, one more question.
Sure.
Is it typical or required for a GAHI to be an ASHI?
No. There's no requirement for any member of GAHI to be a part of any of these organizations. I do know we have a number of members of our association who are ASHI. Are you ASHI?
Yes.
Okay, Larry's ASHI. I know Richard's not ASHI.
No,
No,
InterNACHI.
I'm not. I mean, I'm nor NACHI. Are you NACHI?
InterNACHI, yeah.
You joined NACHI? Okay. You can become an InterNACHI member.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm just saying. You can become an InterNACHI member. Just research it. It's not that hard. And you probably could take the test and do real well on it. Members are required to maintain a continuing education credits. The ICC began about 3 years ago making a requirement that anyone who is wanting to retain their credentials, just like what you're doing today, you're getting educational credits for continuation of your licensing. ICC says that 50% of your credits have to come from the ICC. So just going out and taking a class from somebody, I mean, they accept ASHI credits, they accept GAHI credits, but 50% of those credits have to be specifically from the ICC. And we do that. We have a conference once a year. We had one last year with an ICC presenter there, and everyone, whether they were a GAHI member or not who was there, got ICC credits, because you have to renew them every 3 years, and if you don't, you go in kind of a limbo status until you get it renewed. And if you don't do it in 3 years after that, then you have to take the test all over again, and that's a lot of fun. Isn't it, Larry? Okay. So, what is a home inspection? I hope that's at least reasonably legible. Every topic you see on that board has multiple elements below it. These are purely topical areas. So an inspector has to look at every one of these things, and in each category has to know a vast number of things to examine and look for. Basic home inspection. That's what a home inspection is all about, what's going on. So but a home inspector also has limitations, things that basically he's not required to do and really can't do. It's a visual, non-invasive inspection, meaning that he doesn't go digging holes in walls, doing that type of thing. It's basically a visual inspection, just like the homeowner would all of a sudden discover something that he sees. An inspector doesn't provide an estimate of the remaining life of the home, structure, anything mechanical, roof, etc. He has no way of knowing how long something's going to last. He can endanger, obviously, some logical things himself or cause property damage. That would be an element that he would be doing that potentially could do that, but does it just to find out. I mean, you can't do that. Like lighting certain things that are gas supplied and the gas is turned off, you know, some brilliant things like that. Report on conditions of septic systems and related septic components. An inspector looking at a house cannot tell you what the condition of that septic tank is, period. That belongs to someone who services, maintains, installs septic systems. Now, there are sometimes obvious things that he can see, like a drain field that basically is sunken in all over the place, and you can see where the drain field goes. I mean, that becomes kind of an obvious thing, and basically his intent is to report a potential condition issue that warrants further investigation by a qualified professional. Or a drain field that's sopping wet and everything's perking to the surface and it stinks like crazy. I mean, those are two obvious things, but beyond that, he cannot tell you what is in the ground and the condition of that septic system. Just can't do it. Ignite fuel systems other than those having a switch control, like a gas cook surface. You know, you light that. That's a gas, an installed gas log system that has a switch control on it. If it's something that requires sticking a match in there, he's not required to do that, because we have no way of knowing what your battery is running low.
Joe, can an inspector turn on the water at the street?
An inspector, let me say this, an inspector can do anything he wants to do that he takes responsibility for. So, and I'll touch on turning on water on streets, things of that nature. If you have a house that the water's been turned off for, but it's available to be turned on, it's not locked off, obviously if it's locked off, he couldn't do it in any case. He assumes then the responsibility to do that if he chooses to do that. Been there, done that, don't do it. Period. I have put water in house twice and I'm not doing it a third time. Fortunately, in all those cases, I was able to say, I'm sorry, I was told I could do this, da 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 da. I mean, it becomes his responsibility to get, number one, permission, number two, a waiver of liability. So that's
It's actually our responsibility as agents. I mean, I write it into contracts that the seller will have all.
Right, it's a seller's
have all
responsibility,
utilities
not
functioning
ours.
inside the house, because, right, our inspection process is to be no different than the homeowner or the home buyer walking in that house and begin to live in it. Power on, water on, gas on if gas is there. We're not turning those things on because we have no knowledge as to why they're not. And a contractor coming in and doing the assessment, he's already thinking, all right, there's a problem, I got to do something to find out where the problem starts, and then from that point he can take over. That's not.
You must love HUD homes.
I'm sorry?
You must love HUD homes.
I tell you what, I don't mind HUD homes because HUD has a requirement when it comes to inspecting a home. It requires that before the inspection takes place, that all of these things have to be functional. What I dislike are bank-owned properties. Now, banks have gotten smart since 2008 on properties that they used to own that don't own most of anymore. But they all of a sudden realize in a variety of ways, not just from the standpoint of utilities, but also painting the green and purple walls. Beige, you know, we've all seen those, I guess. Anyways, all right, so operate heating units heating and cooling systems. There's a limitation so far as running heating systems. This time of year, obviously, we're going to run it. In the summertime, when it's 90 degrees outside, we're not going to run it. Now, I will do what I call a bump run. I'll turn it on to make sure it comes on, but I'm not going to push heat in the house. But obviously, in the wintertime, the converse situation exists. With a conventional AC system, you run an AC compressor and the temperature outside is 40 degrees, you've just bought a compressor. Because when you get to temperatures basically below 65 degrees over a 24-hour period, the viscosity level of the lubricant in that compressor is like Jell-O. And if it doesn't connect up fast enough, you can destroy a compressor that otherwise probably maybe have had another 6 months to a year's worth of life in it. So we do not turn AC systems on when the outside temperature is 65 degrees or below 65 degrees for a 24-hour period. I have done it when the temperature was roughly 63, 64. I'll go out and I'll check the thermostat, check the temperature on the compressor, and if it's within that area, and if it's a relatively recent compressor, I'll turn it on to see if it's pumping cold air, but I'm not going to do what's called a delta difference between the supply and the return. I will do a supply and return on heating, but I won't do it on cooling. And obviously, as the seasonal changes, it does make the inspection process a little longer on the fall and on the spring because we're doing both. So, in case. All right, we don't provide solutions for condition issues. Solutions mean that we're telling you what the problem is and how to correct it. That belongs to a professional contractor. Report on cosmetic issues, that has to do with the inside of the house. Operate and report lawn irrigation systems, swimming pool equipment, except for safety net. When it comes to a swimming pool, we do look at the condition of the protective element around the house and any electrical components, but we do not look at, as a standard, the pool equipment itself. Okay? And I think this from here, you want to pick it up here? Okay. All right. So home inspections, standard. What we do every day, looking at the house from top to bottom, inside and out, on the center process. Maintenance and pre-sales, these are types of inspections we do. Sometimes we're called to do a maintenance, sometimes we're called to do a pre-sale inspection. Do probably more pre-sale inspections than maybe certain maintenance inspections, but that's a specialized inspection. Specific limited inspections, that basically follows into the maintenance type of category. That's where someone wants us to look at a specific thing. I just had a deck put on my house, and I got an issue, got a question, can you come and take a look at it, and da-da-da-da. So that kind of thing. That is a limited inspection. New construction phase inspections, pre-pour foundation, have done a number of those. Larry, I'm sure, have you done pre-pour foundations?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's called a three-phase, probably the least common, but that's the process where everything is set up prior to the pour being done. Probably one of the most difficult to coordinate because when the builder's ready for that thing to be poured, he don't want to wait 3 or 4 days for an inspector to come out there and do his inspection besides what the county's already done.
Question, how many of those do you usually do on a percentage basis of your total business?
Less than 1% on a foundation. I mean, most of the time.
I mean in general, on new construction.
On new construction, right, obviously, new
About
construction.
1%?
Yeah, last year I did 3, where I actually did a foundation inspection. They were both slabs. Foundations, and basically what we're doing, we're looking at the framing element to see that it's installed correctly, and then we're doing some element of pressure testing, although we're not doing geo testing like a compaction level, but I do a type of probe around in some areas and put a probe in, and if the probe gets into the ground maybe less than a foot, I don't find a problem. If my probe goes into the ground that far, then I've got a problem, because that area is too wet at that stage for them to pour in there for it to substantially hold itself in place. Did find that one time last year. Pre-drywall finished inspections, obviously the property's completed and the builder says, okay, I'm ready to go.
At the time of the CO,
Yeah, that's at the time of the CO, okay? And then warranty inspections kind of come about at the far end, the other end of the process, new construction. Somebody will call, I'm coming up on my 1-year warranty, will you come and take a look at my house and see what you could find? And then I ask, who did the first inspection? Well, I want a different set of eyes. That's fine, that tells me a lot.
Joe, if I could interject, I mean, one of the issues about this, the pre-pour of the foundation, if you can get there, you know, they can call you out before they start pouring cement. But in that code book, the foundation requires for these foundations to be so far below frost level. I mean, and if that foundation is on more than 2 feet of compacted soil or uncompacted soil, it's got to be engineered. I mean, there's a lot of things to look at, and
Yeah.
in this new U for grounding system. And once that's all that cement's poured, I mean, none of that is visible. You know, I mean, and that's the whole
Yeah.
thing. The whole thing sits on. It's
Right.
really important.
On the pre-pour foundation, there's a variety of things to be examined. And the county, I will say, the probability of that inspection, the county inspection, probably is more acute because it's not, in most cases, a very complicated inspection. But it is probably the one beginning inspection that they probably get right almost every time. Can't swear to it 100%, but almost every time. Okay? All right. Options. Termite pest control inspections. Termite inspections. That is a licensure process by the state, by the way. So if an inspector is supplying a letter and doing a termite inspection on an inspection process, he number one has to be licensed. And that license, just like your real estate license, has to be with a bonded real estate company. So he's doing an inspection for real estate, for a pest control company. That's fine. That inspector maybe does 2, 3, 4 a week. I tell my clients 2 things. Number one, if it's a resale house, find out who the current owner uses, because that company, number one, wants to keep you as a client, and number 2, probably will supply you with a letter at no cost. Probably, maybe not. If not, you need to communicate with your pest control, with a pest control company, and have them do it for you, as opposed to have an inspector, because if a problem comes back along the way, you have communicated and already have an agreement with a pest control company, as opposed to then calling the inspector, and the inspector's going to give you a letter, whoever it was, and then they may be very good, they may be, who knows. But anyway, I'm telling you, I don't do that. Roofing inspections, just what they are. I mean, roofing inspections, pool inspections. This is an inspection that an inspector, a property inspector, can do if he's qualified. Most of the guys don't do this. Again, that inspector maybe looks at a couple a week during the summertime. I would want a guy who looks at 7 or 8 a day. So it's kind of logical. Air quality, radon, asbestos, lead inspections. Those are all inspections that require a qualifying process. You have to be knowledgeable. I am CRMI certified, that's air quality, that deals with mold inspections. Richard and I are both radon measurement assessment process. I can do asbestos testing and I can do lead inspections, and so can you. However, there is a distinctive difference between those 2 processes based upon the EPA guidelines. You cannot do an asbestos inspection on a property that's being torn down, because the county municipality is going to want an EPA letter from that unless you're licensed to do it. If you want to do a lead inspection, there's 2 processes. One is a swab spot test that you can go to Ace Hardware, and then maybe even now Home Depot has it. Buy the kit, look at it, read what the instruction says, and do the test right there on the spot. The other process, this guy carries a $10,000 plus instrument that carries radioisotope in it. He has to be licensed by the EPA to do it. And to that point, it's a very different. The first test that you do, spot test, is a probative test. The other test is not. He basically comes up to a piece of paint, puts the Geiger counter on it. If it registers with a lead-based paint, then he makes his notations and supplies you with a report.
So Joe, will that look through 5, 10, 15 layers of paint?
It probably could. It's looking for, however this particular device is is so designed, it's looking for a radio, it's looking for a response back based upon a signal that it produces. It is, in essence, like a Geiger counter.
They charge well for it.
And I will tell you, it's an expensive process. The average cost is probably $1,200 to $1,500 for the guy to go in there and do that.
We
So-
just say, don't eat the paint.
So,
Right.
yeah, we say, the
That's
thing
good
about,
to
the
me.
thing about asbestos and the thing about lead, if you keep it
What's that?
encapsulated and don't disturb it, you're just fine, okay? All right. And what we'll focus on today is the standard home inspection. If we have opportunity, we will touch on those last four things toward the end of the whole process. So, summary, who is the ICC, IRC, we talked about those. Code knowledge and what the key element is with code knowledge. We talked about GAHI and who we are. We're the only organization that makes that requirement for the guy who looks at your property. And why we need a home inspection and the types and limitations of inspections. Richard,
You're up, okay?
Mr. Smith.
All right, we are moving at a rapid pace here. A little bit behind schedule, but we'll adjust. We can do that. We're actually going to change speed a little bit now. We're not talking about the structure, the organization of a home inspection company or the authority behind it, but we're going to talk about things that home inspectors actually look at and the limitations that we have on each individual area and actually what we cover during an inspection. So we have touched base on the standards of practice and we've covered all that stuff you've seen there, but let's go a little bit more along with covering the standards of practice and hitting the codes. We're also, just like with new construction, but mainly on resales, that we're going to cover damage, defects, design flaws, and safety issues. So we're really required to cover those to protect our clients. Now we're going to go further into what a home inspector actually covers. You have the interior inspections, and that includes the mechanical, plumbing, electrical, and then room by room assessment. The exterior, did you want to sit down? You've been standing for a
No,
while.
I'm fine, thank you.
You've been like a home inspector in Stanford for 3 hours.
Yeah, I'm thinking of taking that test.
And then the exterior, we have the exterior finishes, it's roof, siding, grounds, and so forth. And then optional, we talked about that, the radon, mold, asbestos, and so forth. Let's just get into the heating and air. What an inspector is supposed to report on is the location, the fuel type, type of system it is, whether it be even gas or electric or combination. Sometimes it's a little difficult to find out if it is a piggyback system, as in a combination. It's a gas-fired system that actually uses a heat pump portion of the time, and if the temperature gets too low, then it kicks into gas. It's difficult to tell on some units whether it is a dual system.
Excuse me, Richard,
Yeah.
so every heat pump, when it goes into that emergency,
It is considered.
that
It's
normally
considered.
it's still electric?
It's still electric.
Yeah, 'cause they don't
And
have
it
those
runs
places that have
into
gas.
right. You don't have the gas lines. You don't have the flue vents, and it's considered
It's a strip heat.
one. It's a strip heat. It goes into the electric furnace part, as opposed to the heat pump, and they call that 100% efficient heat.
Is it?
It is 100% efficient. Every bit of energy you put in comes out and is distributed throughout the house. Now, a heat pump, they can multiply that by 10. So it's over 100%. So it's just more expensive. It's just more expensive to run. So, and then
Richard,
operate the heating system.
can I interrupt?
Yeah.
To your point though, about this heat strip on a heat pump at emergency, I always try to inform my clients that, you know, I always try to take them to that thermostat and show them, you know, the settings on it, you know, and to inform them that, because it's real important on that heat pump, when you have it set in the standard heat mode, under certain conditions, if it's extremely cold out,
Right.
that resistive heating system will kick in temporarily.
Uh-huh.
But always warn them, you know, to keep an eye on that, because if it comes on and stays on, you have a problem, because you're heating only
So
with.
they have to flip
Right.
the,
Well, it could
setting
be,
or?
it could be the same problem as the air conditioning, could just simply be low on Freon. So they put it in the, you know, or they could accidentally push it over into the emergency mode
Emergency.
and just be heating only with that, you know? So it's real important to educate people on how that works and what to look for with that thing, you know?
So as far as the operating of a system, we'll operate it. We'll check to make sure just the heat pump is kicking on before the strip heat. And we'll operate a gas furnace, assuming the gas is on and it's ready to operate. If the gas is off at the outside of the house, or if it's off at the unit, then there's no standard practice that would have us turn it on because of the liability. Inspecting the gas ventilation for gas-fired units and report on deficiency or defects. So it's the gas part of a furnace we'll also check. This is your AC compressor outside unit, and it could also be a heat pump. You can find that on the model number sometimes. Sometimes it's a little difficult to determine. But we do operate the AC in the cool time of the month. Joe mentioned that if it's below 60, then we won't be checking that over the previous 24 hours. I actually do, like Joe, I turn it on, make sure it's cooling, but I don't register and see if the temperature drop is proper. We report on the cooling system, the location of the AC units and basic capacity of the units. We can give you a rough figure on what all the ACs combined will service, how many square feet. We don't measure the house, so we're not going to turn around and say, well, this serviced 3,000 square feet and it's too small, because we didn't take a measurement. We don't go that route. That's the appraiser would measure the size of the house. And then inspect the filtration system and report on its condition. We just check the filter.
Question on the HVAC.
Yeah.
Do you ever estimate the, I've seen inspectors do this before, the estimated life of the unit?
We're not required to. Some will say that an AC, the way I report it is an AC typically lasts 10 to 12, 13 years. And then I'll say it looks like that. The unit is 8 years old.
And then you leave
I
it.
can't,
and then you leave
yeah.
it.
We leave the math to them, and it's, because there is no, go ahead, Joe, you explain this.
What, the information label on the unit, if it's legible, will provide us two important set of numbers. Number one is a model number, which specifies a variety of things, one of them being the size of the unit and its tonnage capacity. And the other is the serial number, and in that serial number, unless the label specifically says what the manufacturing date is on it, and that serial number, there is a coded in there as to the manufacturing date. And from that, we will tell you what the manufacturing age of the unit is. That does not specify the service age on it. Usually, an item goes that's manufactured January of 2012, probably has gone into service somewhere between there and June, roughly 6 months or less on an HVAC company's shelf. And then, so we basically look at a unit saying the average life of a compressor, depending upon its type. An AC system is probably going to run a little bit longer than maybe a heat pump system, because a heat pump system is designed to run 365 in its range. But say in the range of anywhere from 10 to 15 years, give or take. I will tell you that if it's running when I leave it, it's running and working. It can die tomorrow. And I cannot tell
And
you.
you have no liability.
I cannot.
Yeah,
I
we
cannot.
can't, you can't predict the future.
No,
We can say if it's
it's-
operating, we can tell you if it's operating in the proper temperature drop or
Right.
reduction.
3 or 4 years old, you would expect it to be, have a warranty still exactly.
Do you report
Right.
on? Do you report on the type of freon, like with the coil,
No.
No.
that if it's
No.
obsolete or?
Yeah. So, and then the filtration system we mentioned. Report on all operating deficiencies, including temperature differentials, and that's what we were just talking about, the differential temperature difference between the supply and the return. The standard is 15 degrees if it's dropping 15 degrees, we actually have laser thermometers run around. We can actually check all the different supplies and registers in the house, and as we do that, we're actually checking to see if this one is as cold as that one, is as cold as that one, within a few degrees, and we can maybe tell if there's something wrong with the ductwork disconnected or whatever. Larry?
Yes, sir. Also from that model number, you can determine the SEER rating. I don't know if you've all heard of that or not, the seasonal energy efficiency rating. And in January 1 of 2015, the least energy efficiency rated system that they can install or manufacture in the States is a SEER 14. Yeah. And some of these home warranties that people have out there have an exclusion, and they'll exclude any of those components that don't meet current standards. Like some of the older units are still the old SEER 10s, which are no longer manufactured. So those home warranties will tell you, if those go out, we're not going to replace them because they can't get them anymore.
That's something we need to
Or
check.
the Freon too.
Yeah, we went from SEER 10 to SEER
13.
12 and then to 13. When we went to 12 and 13, the Freon gas material changed from an R22 to an R14, and then from that distance forward. But SEER 14 today is the least SEER rating that's available. And I mean, I've looked at houses that have SEER 17s and SEER 18s.
Yeah.
Why? But in any case, so your SEER rating can be well on up there if they want to spend the money for it.
Amen.
All right, so along
More
with
dollars.
you can see the AC unit here, and this line at the bottom actually goes through the house, up through the attic, and then it attaches to the unit upstairs, and that's the coolant line. It's insulated so it doesn't condensate, drip on your ceilings, and help it stay efficient. It's also attached to this unit. This is an example of your gas unit, and you can tell by the incoming gas line and the vent right there. But this is the heat pump unit. There's hardly anything you can actually inspect on a heat pump furnace, except for things that are attached to it that are coming off, and you can see you can't take any covers off. That's a licensure barrier that we can't cross.
On a gas-fired system, the panels are basically most of the time manually removable without screws.
And that would be the
Sometimes they
one.
are.
That would be
Yeah,
the one
that
on the
would be
right
the
side. We
one
took
up
the
there.
cover off there, and you can actually see the rust accumulation.
The
You can
middle
see
one
the
is
burrs.
the electric unit, and that is, we typically don't remove the panel covers over those.
Right.
There's really nothing to examine. The only reason you pull the panel covers off of the gas is because you want to examine what's taking place on the inside of that system, because that's a carbon monoxide and the assessment in that industry.
So
Right.
is the key to it the screws? In other words, if it snaps off, you can do it, but if it's screwed, you can't take the screws out?
Not
Is
always. Not always.
Oh,
Gas.
okay.
Usually, sometimes it's just a lift-off cover.
Right,
Sometimes
right.
they're thumb screws.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're little toggles, and
Okay.
But they're
but
made to open sometimes to be able to put a filter in there if you've got a system that has a filter that goes in the bottom plenum.
it's also where you find the model numbers.
Right. That's one of the reasons we
So-
also take the cover off, to see what the sizing of the unit is. What is BTU rating?
As far as the filters go, even for your own house, you can determine there is an airflow to a furnace, and sometimes filters have a directional on the filter, and you don't know which way is it, go this way or that way, which way you put the arrow. And what you do is you find the filter location. In this case, it's down here. So I actually know that the airflow is this without even seeing anything else about the system. Now, to remember which way the airflow is, the air always gets filtered before it goes through the unit. So if it's on the side, it could be on the right or the left. It just depends on how they actually set it up. But if you find the filter and then find the unit, you know the airflow is toward the unit from the filter.
That's
So
good
you
info.
can, yeah, it's just one of those.
And you'd be surprised how many we find in Bible.
I'd say a
sure I
third
know.
of them
Yeah.
at least. You know, it's a 50-50 chance in putting them in, but I'd say a
And we
third of
don't,
them are actually
and we
wrong.
don't turn them around, by the way, once we find them,
We
because all you're
don't.
doing is taking all that dirt that's on that side
Yep.
and now putting it to the inside.
Yeah. So, gas valves and water valves. We're gonna just touch on that, and I think this is actually good information for a realtor to know. We have, this is your gas meter, and they have cutoffs at the meter. If we get a close-up here, if you don't have a meter on the outside of the house, the gas is either non-existent, off, it's locked off or something, but there is an example of it being locked off. And that is something that you can't even get with bolt cutters. It is from the gas company, and you can tell it's off. Even if that bolt wasn't there, you can tell then the holes line up so in order to put a lock there so you know it's off. And also, right on the other side of that little, it's the valve. It's actually how you turn the gas on and off. If the plumbing is in this direction and that valve is perpendicular to it, well then it's off. If it's in line, then it's free flow. So that's how you determine if it's off. Turn it off, it's just taking a wrench and turning it clockwise, 90 degrees. It's a ball valve. The product, water or gas, goes through that hole, and if it's sideways, then it can't get through. So that's the idea, that's the philosophy behind it. This, on the other hand, is a water valve. Same idea, it's a ball valve. It's a 90-degree turn, just turn it clockwise. That is in line, so the water's on. If it was perpendicular, the water would be off. This is called a gate valve. This is a water valve. And this is the type you screw in. It's actually a screw, and they call it a gate because in the water line there's actually something that just shuts off the water. As you screw it in, it closes the flow of water. And this is also a ball valve, and it's for the plastic water lines. These I particularly don't like. I've got a few of them on my house. I've got the CPVC, but they're often difficult to turn. And insight on plumbing. All right, we're going to have to talk fast. We're going to talk a little bit about what a home inspector covers, and that's identifying the water supply, whether it be public or private. Bottom left is a good example of what you'll find in a private well water system. And the water pressure is required to be, the standards is between 40 and 80. Most of the pressure regulating valves we see here are set at 60. And they come in. If you see this, you know it's definitely a municipal system. Water comes in at the street at about 120, give or take a little bit, and it reduces it down to 60. Everybody wants big water pressure.
Yeah.
No, they don't want big water pressure. They want volume at the shower. Recently they have restricted the flow on the showers, and everybody says, I can't even get wet, I want water. You need enough pressure to get it to there, but you want the volume at the shower is what you're looking for. If you get pressure that's too high, above 80, then you risk damaging your fixtures. And big water leaks and so forth. And then we also mention where the water cutoff is and what type of material it is. And we identify the sanitary waste disposal system, your septic tank. I'd say a large majority of the time, if you have a property that's kind of rural but kind of close to the city, you don't know, there's no way you can tell. In half the cases, there's probably no way you can tell if it is a septic system, or if the septic system was there and the sewer was close, so they actually attach to it. You don't know which one it is. So most of the time, I just say, well, you
Look
can't
at the water
determine.
bill.
Yeah.
Then you'll know if you're being charged incorrectly or not.
That's right. So if you do have, on the bottom right, you'll see that is septic alert system. If you have, this comes with property that's usually a little close in, house to house. You have a septic system, everybody has 3/4 of an acre to an acre. And you have a big downhill towards the house, and your field lines, your septic filtration, your line system, actually has to get elevated. So it's a double tank system. Gravity feeds that first tank with the alarm on it, and then it gets pumped to another tank where they actually feed the line system.
So there are 2 septic tanks?
2 septic tanks.
One's a
If you
pump
ever
up
see an
tank.
alarm like this, the alarm is in the event that pump isn't working, getting it up to the next one, then you get notified before full house.
We have a full house.
Yeah. And I saw on a plumber's truck, funniest advertisement I ever saw. flush is better than full house. It's cards.
I've actually got a system. When I had my house,
You do have this system.
when I had my house inspected when it was new, one of the things that came up was, I'm on a basement and the electricity supply
Mhm.
to the pump was wired through the GFCI, which covered which was on the outside outlet on the basement door.
First thing I would do is I would go to the store and get one of those things you can plug in, and if it doesn't have power, it lights up, it chirps. It'll chirp at you,
Yeah,
it'll warn
but
you
it was,
something.
you know,
That definitely needs to be rewired, but that's an easy rewiring fix. Wow. All right, let's talk about polybutylene. Polybutylene is slowly disappearing. I see it every once in a while.
And that's not polybutylene at the top of right.
No, that's just a poor plumbing job. That's your trap, so you don't get the sewer gases back into the house. So polybutylene is actually rather easy to identify. It's gray. It's like the electric gray pipe, and sometimes I get it confused. You have to look closely, but you'll have a number of different types of fittings on there. You'll have
Started out with plastic, went to aluminum, then went to copper. and
yeah, they
then
say the
another
copper is,
word.
yeah, they say if you have copper fittings, it's great.
Nope.
I've got a plastics background. Polybutylene is great, but if it's made out of tolerance, you'll get pitting, chipping, flaking, cracking, breaking. And
Wasn't
they blame it on
the problem in the
it-
fittings rather than in the pipe?
No, well, yes, in
It's-
part,
In part?
but in part it also had to do with
It's
the,
the
with the
pipe.
chemical interactions. Probably didn't have as much of an issue on this end, but
Chemical-
in Atlanta, downtown, where
Right.
you're dealing with fluorination, chlorination in the water supply system, it became
We got it
a
out
chemical
here.
reaction.
Right.
So, you know.
Right. So they are disappearing, but you can take a quick cursory look and find it. You can find it at the water heater. The lines coming off there. Sometimes they'll change those. Leave it in the wall, and it's difficult. If we can't see it, we can't inspect it. Let me touch base on something that Joe was alluding to. I want to make it clear. We are not a specialist in anything. We're not a licensed electrician. We're not licensed plumbers. We're not licensed heating and airs. We're not structural engineers. We are general practitioners. If you have a heart problem, you go to your general practitioner and says you've got a heart problem, you need to go to a specialist. So we know a good deal about all aspects of a house and how they work together. So we can typically find things and direct you to the correct location.
Good
So-
diagnostician.
Yeah, we run everything that should be run, operate everything that should be operated, and just report on what we find. So, if you find polybutylene, if you see polybutylene is the gray pipe coming into the valve. The right picture has a gray pipe coming off. They've never had a problem with that. I'm not 100% sure it's polybutylene, but it
That's
is gray.
PEX. The red pipe is PEX.
The gray on the right
pipe
side.
coming up from the floor level, that is polybutylene. And this is probably one of the easiest ways of identifying it. Is look under a cabinet.
Underneath the sink, you have on the left side you have the gray pipe. That is the polybutylene. If you look closely, you can see a PB and a few numbers after it. They're different numbers, but PB is a dead giveaway for polybutylene.
Let me just quickly interject here. The piece of piping that's above that valve that leads to the bottom of
On the right?
on either side, on either side of those, that piece of pipe that comes above the valve and leads to the bottom of the faucet, that too is polybutylene, but it is not part of the issue with the primary piping that's jointed piping. That's also polybutylene. The other piping above it is not a problem. It's the other primary piping that's through the walls in areas like you're seeing here.
And then of course we have the blue poly that comes from the street, the 1 inch, and it's an abrasive issue if it goes through anything abrasive and you have leaks. And it seems to be disappearing. We'll have a handout for you about the information that helps you organize this information. But years between 1985 and 1995, this seemed to be an issue. So if you have a house within that year frame, then that's the one you need to look a little bit closer at. So you look under the cabinets, you look for water stains on ceilings that are underneath the plumbing issue, and then look at the baseboards too. You can see that from any mold and any evidence of past water problems. Now, water heaters, we mentioned the location, just generally where it is, the cutoffs. 3 different types of cutoffs. You have the water cutoff, so it's usually on the cold water side. And we usually operate it, make sure it's free and clear. The electric cutoff, if this was an electric water heater, then within sight, you're supposed to have a pull or disconnect. So the plumber who's working on the electric water heater he can visually look and know it's off. In this case, if it were electric, then he can see the electrical panel, you can see it's right next to it, and then the gas cutoff, and that's still that 90-degree cutoff valve. On gas units, we check the venting, make sure it has the right slope and connected properly, and no evidence of rust and problems with it. Design criteria is in location. In the code book, in this case, it looks like it's up about 18 inches. We're just going to assume it's 18 inches. It's supposed to be any gas-fired appliance needs to be raised 18 inches off the garage floor. That's in the code book. And that applies to any gas water heater that's located in the garage. It's in the code book twice. These particular ones, they have little vents on the side, and it's a closed encapsulated system. They were designed to be on the floor. But the only way we can legally say that it's okay is if it was listed and labeled to be on the floor. I haven't found that listing and label. And if you see this little guy right there, he has a gas tank with a circle through it, and it's a guy swimming in a lake of fire. And it's just an indication that the plumbing company doesn't want to take that sign off because they're covering themselves. I called Ream to see what their standard is, and they said, oh, go back to the municipality, whatever the municipality says. But the problem with locating those on the floor is if gas fumes hit it, it locks up your system and you have to throw your whole water heater away. It won't explode, that's what I understand. So I always still suggest
What if it's in the cellar or another
a
location?
garage.
Just the garage?
Garage.
Just
Only
the-
where you can get flammable fumes, likely get flammable fumes. Now, obviously in a
Lawnmowers,
basement, if you store,
if you store your
you know,
gas,
that
and
kind of thing.
lawnmowers, and yeah.
This particular unit are everything from 2003 and coming forward are called FVIR, flammable vapor ignition resistors. And anything today that was before 2003 is, number one, aged itself out.
Right.
But in the case, go ahead, Richard, I'm sorry.
And then the gas type, this is your continuous water heater, not instant unless it has a pump on it. But this is typically the Renai. They had 2 Renais here. One typically says you won't run out of hot water ever. But I guess if you're pulling several showers and the washer at the same time, then you want to make sure you're feeding the hot water heater that's going to distribute the water with hot water so you don't ever run out.
So that is a gas unit, right?
Always gas. I have heard that they tried to make the continuous hot water electric. Haven't seen one out there. I think they try it, they send them back. They probably make 50 units, and they send it out, comes back. Send it out, comes
They're
back.
just not able
And
to
they can't produce the hot water like the gas
Just can't
can.
keep up.
And then on these, there's hardly anything that they need to actually look at. The pressure reducing valve, we'll get into that in a little bit. And then the vents, just making sure everything is hooked up and particular cutoffs.
Is that a warning light on top?
No, those are vents.
Oh, up top is the vent.
They don't have to
And
be
this
vented, they
is-
don't have to be vented outside?
They are vented
They are,
outside.
that's an exterior wall.
Oh,
And it just turns
Both
here.
expelling and intake combustion,
Yep.
both.
And this is the safety valve. We're doing on time, a little bit over. But I've got one of those right here, and this is probably, I believe, probably the one of the most important valves of your house. It's temperature,
TPR.
TPR, temperature pressure relief, temperature
Yeah.
pressure
relief
regulator.
valve. Regulator.
Yeah, regulator, relief valve. It is just a pin, and this right here should spin really easy. It's just a pin that goes through on a spring. If the temperature or the pressure goes crazy in your water heater, then this opens up and allows superheated water or just to release the pressure out of the house. So this is actually good maintenance tip. Just good, make sure this operates. You're supposed to test it once a year. I'm going backwards. So what happens if you don't have a safety valve, or it gets rusty and it's seized up? Sometimes, you know, I almost, if it's discharging to a safe place from my client, I'll actually break the seal and let it drip outside or something and say it's seized up. It's a very significant safety issue. I'll even tell the owners of the house. But let's take a look at this quick video of what happens if your water heater doesn't have a TMP valve or it seizes up.
It'll be on there, but it can be seized, where it's basically, what happens is that the water line has been opened and closed on this valve, and because of the way the drain is installed, you don't have any relief of the backwater on that valve. The water is only designed to be on one side, the inside of the tank. On the back side of the valve, if water stands there, it will eventually corrode and prevent that valve from opening. And this is Mythbusters, but
It is Mythbusters. I actually saw, in searching this out, I saw a house that the garage actually exploded. And they didn't know what it was. They thought it was a bomb. They thought it was after 9/11, so they thought it was terrorism. But it was a guy who lived in Florida who, his water heater quit working. So he shut down his water heater. And it just sat there. I don't know how long, but in Florida, he didn't even take hot showers. This guy was, I mean, it was a rough guy, kind of almost like a homeless guy. It was a small house, in poor shape. And after it exploded, then it was in much more shape. But they found the water heater a couple blocks away. And the reason it exploded, he had it turned off. The reason it exploded is he had a friend come and stay with him and said, I can get your water heater working again. He got it working again, didn't check the TP valve. And it took that night. So let's take a look and see what would happen. After this, we'll take a break.
it literally can be a missile. There is no
In
question
slow
about it.
motion,
Is that the hot water heater?
that's the
blowing up?
water heater.
It is a hot water heater.
That's the water heater taking off like a rocket.
Playing
I have
outside.
seen, I have
Houston, we
seen
have a problem.
a picture, I have seen a picture of,
Just hit the mouse pad.
I've seen a picture of a water heater that had blown up because of the TNT valve, TPR valve. And it was in the basement of a two-story house. And the water heater didn't make it out, but it was stuck in the roof. Two-story house. So, let's take a break. We're
On that
gonna...
So the name of the
Yeah, on
thing is,
that note.
don't have your bedroom above the hot water heater.
That's right. That's right.
You just need to hit the mouse. That's
So let's just take 5 minutes and come back here quarter
When you
after.
do the mouse over, the little red start button will come on and just,
Okay, all right.
and then to get out, once it's finished, then you just click it, the mouse button again, it takes it out of YouTube.
Joe, you're up.
What else does an inspector include in this? That has a window that's an operational window. Now, you can have a room that's got a fixed window in it, but if it's an operational window, the whole purpose of it is to be a fire egress issue. Broken windows, thermal seals around windows. So whenever you have windows that are thermal panes type, the most common giveaway if the seal basically has been lost is there's a fogging, sometimes moisture condensation can be there. And if it's not visible, then we can't tell you that it's broken, but those are some common elements that you find. Exterior doors having adequate weather stripping. Georgia now has a very stiff energy code for new construction. And part of the process is the amount of heat and air loss coming in and out of the house, and that's another step in the whole process. And we're required, and where required, fire-proof rated doors. These specifically have to do with doors going into garages, areas where you've got an enclosed garage. It's basically as fire rated. Now, if it's a carport which builders today don't build carports, but if it's a carport still, it has to be of a particular type so far as being, it becomes then an exterior door. So it has to be exterior rated for that point. But there are times when I've looked at garages where people have, it's got some age on it, and people have come back for some particular reason and put an interior door. Not allowed. It has to be fire rated, which means it has to be able to resist the issues. All right, inspections inside. I mean, here obviously we're dealing with any kind of an area of problem with the ceiling, stains, etc. on ceilings. I mean, these are, some things are pretty obvious, but other times, and we're talking about with all the with polybutylene piping. If the house does have polybutylene piping in it, we've been able to identify that, and we see stains. Especially between floors, number one. Most of the time, if it's a two-story house, there's a stain on the ceiling. It's going to be related for something, obviously, from the attic, whether it's the roof or HVAC, condensate leak, things of that nature. But we're also looking, and we're not, these are not cosmetic. This kind of an issue is not cosmetic. Okay, inside on floors. When we're looking at floors, basically we identify the general type of material that's there in place. Here we have a ceramic inlaid floor that has a crack in it, and this crack potentially could have a structural issue involved to it. So these are things that we talk about. We're also talking about floors that have significant irregularities to them, which then pose trip hazards. That's really the only function that we do here. If it's stained, it's stained. If it's a bad stain where there potentially is a plumbing issue, then that's one thing. But if the dog has peed in that area 3 or 4, 15, 30, 40, 50 times from the previous owner, then it's a stain on the floor, it's a pot that got filled too much. That's not necessarily something that we're going to be focusing on. But these types of things, obviously wooden floors that have had been wet, and then the same thing bottom with the, when you're seeing here at the, I'll get the
General question on
Sure.
the inspection. Is it primarily for, I always understood it to be primarily concerned for safety issues.
That's correct.
As opposed to cosmetic. Is
That's
that
correct. And these things follow into that category. Safety-related issues is what this explains to. And here also, a floor that's very slick looking. Probably if we're looking at a house that's vacant and we have a floor like this, the general expectation is that the homeowner's got a little bit of common sense that something like this, you're going to put an area rug or something down to at least give you some sense of grip. Overly waxed floors. But that's really kind of a small thing. And then cosmetic issues, stains and so forth. This is where coffee's been run back and forth across an area too much and it's been dripped along the way. And then we've got a couple of issues here where thresholds are missing. Now that's another issue because of the lack of a proper threshold or transition between, in this case, some wood and some carpet could be a trip issue. And then you've got the staircase that's on a deck that's outside that obviously is just beyond its life. All right, squeaks. Probably one of the things that I get a lot of times, and I don't mean this to be sound racist or anything like that, but a lot of times when I'm doing properties for clients that come from the Middle East, where they're more commonly walking on floors that are concrete, and then they walk in all of our house structures, which are wood frame structures, and the floor creaks and it's on carpet, they want to know if the house is about to fall in. And I kind of explain to them why that is, and tell them, wood frame houses expand and contract, and when you have that, you have an ability for certain joints to move slightly and you'll get those things. So squeaks are squeaks. They're annoyances, but it's not something that we cite as a major structural problem unless it becomes a more obvious issue of a structural issue. All right. Kitchens. When we're looking at kitchens, we're basically looking at fixed appliances. Refrigerators, we do not make an assessment on it. If somebody wants to know, we'll open the door. If it's cold, it's cold. If it's not, it could be unplugged. But that's, a refrigerator is considered to be a transferable or movable appliance. We do look at dishwashers. We look at all cook systems, whether it's a drop-in, an oven, double wall oven, fixed microwave ovens, countertops we don't look at, vent fan systems, things of that nature. All of those things are basically tested for function, that they work. We don't test temperature unless the guy wants to take it to the next level and do that, that's his choice. But we don't go in there and test temperature because I guarantee you it's not right. I just from personal experience. All right, and the inspector insight for bathroom fixtures. Basically, what you're seeing here is the typical setup. I mean, obviously, all things are all close together. Obviously, the things that you see in black, we cannot see. But we can do a general test process on it to see if there's any kind of leak issue that takes place. Functional leaks, we look for leakage under kitchen, under vanity sinks, things that are very obvious. I mean, toilets, we flush the toilets once, 2 or 3 times to see if there's a leak, maybe dripping out of the tank, and these leaks can be very small, but and seen. Toilet vanity sinks, countertop caulking, because countertops do, depending upon with the type of material, we do look for caulking issues, that any kind of water that could migrate beyond the caulking and get behind the cabinet. As well as wall receptacles where required. GFCIs, I think we all know GFCIs are required in all bathrooms. Fresh air venting fans. Today, on new construction, fresh air venting fans are in bathrooms whether they have a window or not. Typically, we'll not go through and actually pull the vent fan down to see what its CFM rating is compared to what the size of the bathroom is. There are regulations regarding that. That's, you know, a guy can do that if he wants, but in most cases we run it and we're listening more to its functioning. That if it sounds strained, that it's clogged or something to that effect, whether it's a clog within the amount of debris that might have been brought in there, or that its exhaust end has been trapped by a bird's nest on the outside of the house.
If there's no GFCIs in an older house,
We just
is the
comment that
situation grandfathered or?
it's grandfathered. It's grandfathered, but a good inspector is going to say it's highly recommended to convert those receptacles to GFCIs. And I will also tell you, and I just did a house just this past Monday in which it was an older house built in 1973, and they did some upgrades and they put GFCIs in both upstairs bathrooms, in the master bathroom as well as the hall bathroom. I tripped the master bathroom, fine, went to the hall bathroom. When I clicked the switch, it tripped, but it wasn't the GFCI that I was putting the plug in, it was in the master bathroom. So there are also what's called redundant GFCIs. When they're put down line from one that feeds it, and the GFCI that's actually stripping is the one above it. So you have to go back to that one.
Are they put in garages as well?
Yes, sir. GFCIs are required external of the house, which would include a garage where you've got a concrete floor and unfinished basements. They're required any external area of the house, deck, exposed to weather conditions, etc. All kitchen receptacles today, all, whether they are within 6 foot of a water source or not, are required to be GFCI protected, as well as all receptacles in bathrooms are required to be GFCI protected. That's standard code today. That evolved into the system beginning in the mid to early 80s. And as you can tell, mid to early 80s is before Georgia implemented the standard for the state. It then became a requirement for each of those municipalities. And it's interesting that when you go into a house built in 1989, 1990, and you go through and you don't find GFCIs, it's prior to the Georgia code, but it was in the NEC code.
But you do label it in your inspection?
Absolutely. I mean,
So
any
that-
good inspector should do that. Absolutely.
But whether they make the correction or not is up to the
Yeah,
buyer itself.
Richard probably has a similar comment in his report. I comment basically, GFCIs were not a standard for this age of house at the time, but it's highly recommended that he placed it, et cetera and so forth. Okay. Inspection in attics. Basically, the attic system that we're seeing here, besides having some framing issues, by the way, it does have that, but I'm not going to get too involved in that. But this is basically what's called a site-made attic, which basically is stick-made. It means that the framer cuts the wood and puts it together and assembles it. Those are your types of staircases. The upper left-hand, or the upper corner that we're seeing up there, that is a knee wall going into an area off to the corner of a room, and where the roof is basically the area. Bonus rooms are common to have knee wall cavities in them, and that's just an access door. That access door also has to be thermal rated. The attic space here, again, we're looking at ventilation, insulation elements, insulation types, present, place, types of thickness. This does get into some of the more standards today that's with the Georgia Energy Code. Gainesville, Larry, is Gainesville R38 or R30?
It's right on the line.
It's split, it's R30 right now.
It's R30 and
Yeah.
portion of it is, but once you get beyond a certain point, it moves to an
Up in
R38.
Lumpkin County.
Oh,
What's
okay.
R 38 up in
Lumpkin is higher.
North
Okay.
Hall?
All right, so basically that's the thermal rating with the conventional insulation systems and attics that we're seeing there. This picture basically is giving you some indications. That's a scuttle. It just by general appearance it looks like a scuttle. Most builders today don't build scuttles. Scuttles is a push-up opening. They'll put a pull-down staircase today, but we're looking at any kind of issues dealing with the insulation, placement, potential open spaces like we're seeing along in here. These are cavities that can produce what's called a lack of fire blocking. You get an open space inside a wall, you get a fire inside that wall then becomes a chimney, and it's going to pull it straight on up into that area. So that's one of the things that we're also looking at. Here we're looking at insulations when we have typical blow-in insulation. There's your scuttle again. That might be a scuttle, but anyway. This is kind of hard to see along in here, but this is a baffle. When you have blow-in installations, you have to at least relieve some space around vent areas to allow adequate air ventilation. You're seeing some, it's hard to see in this picture, a little bit of discoloration here. Could potentially be a water leak, although in this particular case, I'm not interpreting that as that. I'm interpreting that as where moisture is being basically drawn in through the space that way, and it's discoloring the wood. Water stains typically don't look quite like that. In any case, all right. Coming back to two types of structures, we have stick-made and we have engineered. Today, most all structures today, attic spaces especially, are engineered truss systems. Basically, everything is built off-site to an engineered specification, and then it's all assembled once it's brought to site. The other one, of course, as we stated earlier, is a stick-made.
Is that a certain price point? How do you see that?
The price point probably has a variance to it. I think it has to do more with ability to build it quicker, or assemble it quicker than the
Which
guy
would be
who's the
more a
framer.
production home type setup,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Electrical issues. Most are easy to fix, though some could be quite dangerous. Obviously, in this case. All right. I hope this is not an inspector. I hope this is an electrician. I typically don't stick a screwdriver in an electrical panel, unless it's my own. Number one, electrical panels. All accessible electrical equipment, which includes receptacles, switches, features to be inspected. We're inspecting them for defects. And defects can cover a variety of things. We're also looking at the panels and the breakers within the panel itself. Three different variations here to a manner of speaking. The picture on your left is a standard, what you typically see, an electrical panel in a home. And then if you look just to the left of that, you also see what's called a sub-panel, which basically is another electrical system being taken off of the primary panel. The middle picture, obviously, every inspector should remove the electrical panel cover if possible. I looked at a YouTube video here just within the last couple of 3 weeks, and when I'm trying to just see what people out there are saying, I did find an instructor on an electrical panel from another resource saying, unless you're a qualified electrician, you should not remove the panel cover. And I'm saying to myself, if you're an inspector, you don't remove the panel cover, you're not doing your job. So in this case, what we're looking at here is two electrical panels, and the thing that we're showing here, this is the main disconnect. Just about all electrical systems today have a common main disconnect. There are older systems. The house that I looked at this past Monday had what's called a split bus, which simply means that all your 240 volt breakers cut all the breakers off to 240 volt services. Then you have one 240 volt breaker, or two in this particular case, that cut off everything that's 120. Today, one breaker cuts everything. Boom, one time. What you're seeing over here is where this main disconnect is now actually outside at the meter. And that's very common today. The reason that is on the outside of the house is the same reason the gas meter is on the outside of the house, because if there's a fire, the first two things the fireman's going to do is cut power, and he's going to turn gas off to the house before he lays an axe in anything. because he wants to see tomorrow. Okay, inspection and site for electrical services, 1 through 3. Report locations for main power and source. We're commenting about where the main source comes in from, whether it comes in overhead or it comes in underground. And then we're commenting as to where the meter's located as well. We're reporting the service amperage. The common amperage today on most all houses is 200 amp. 150 is not uncommon at all. Thousands of houses built in 150 amp service. It cannot be below 100 amps. I don't know of anybody building a house today with 100 amps, but it cannot be below 100 amp and be inhabitable, what's called a habitable location. Report on main disconnected locations, whether it's the meter or the main load panel. And they're basically main panels, load panels, feed panels, however they want to be classified as. Identify ground and bonding type and systems. Today, Larry was mentioning UFOR, if you remember a minute ago. UFOR grounding systems are the approved grounding systems for electrical, and basically what that is a grounding wire that runs from the electrical panel source and or from the meter itself where the main disconnect is located to a rebar material that is in the foundation, and then it's clamped to it. The older systems are driven rods that go into ground, and before that they were supplied and bonded to water piping material, which were all copper, which at some point in time has been changed and some plastic has been introduced, and it's no longer a grounding system. There's a plastic changes the whole thing.
If a house is not grounded, an older house is not grounded, how can that be corrected, if at all?
It can be, and an electrician can get in and he can install a proper grounding element to the box itself. If it's two wires coming, if it's a 2-wire system coming in, there's the grounding system does not take it back to the pole. It depends upon Georgia Power or whomever has done the power system, has done any upgrade in the system, but it can be installed. I mean, most houses that are built prior to I'd say early 60s and earlier probably are 2-wire systems. 3-wire grounding system came into play after that period of time, and then it became the commonplace today.
Right.
But that can be taken care of. That can be handled. That's not a problem. It's, and it's not going to be usually very expensive either. Report on all defects found. Defects can range anything from wiring continuity issues to improper groundings if the system is designed as a grounding system. Can be defective breakers. Can be any number of variations that are related to defects. Poor wiring, our wiring configurations, or somebody's gone and filled with some things in the electrical panel who thought they knew what they were doing and luckily didn't get electrocuted in the process. Inspect service panels, types, location, size, number of breakers or fuses, if old types, and who manufactured the panel. Typically panels that are fuse type panels, an inspector looking at a property that's got a fuse type panel, his first comment is highly recommended the panel be updated to a current breaker system, because a fuse that's 15 amps and a fuse at 30 amp are the same size. The only difference is that the 30 amp will let that thing continue to cook when it's designed to kick at 15 amps, and it'll cause a fire. So besides the old penny, everybody's heard about the penny correct thing about
Do you
it.
know approximately what year that changed from the
fuse panel systems probably changed also in the same time period, coming around the early mid-60s. My mother-in-law's house was built in 1965, and I had that panel when we sold her house. We replaced that panel with a current breaker panel. Probably mid-60s there, shortly after that is when breaker systems became the commonplace. And even some of the older panels today, I'll look at them and I will typically recommend, especially if they're older, very crowded type panels, I mean they're split bus panels, things of that nature, I will suggest to consider updating it purely from the standpoint of you want to create a better air circulation in that panel, because it does create heat. I will tell them how many breakers are in the panel, if I can tell you what the size of it is, if it's labeled, and most of the time it'll be labeled, sizing, and I'll also tell you who made the panel. And by that, let's see what comes up here on that. All right, I'm going to tell you that there are 2 dangerous panels in existence out there today. I don't think we actually have it focused here in this inside element. One is called a Federal Pacific Electric panel. That panel and another panel company called Zinsco. Those 2 panel manufacturers no longer exist. They both had significant fire-related issues, and I still find them today. So if you find it, if an inspector looks at a panel and he labels it an FEC, a federal FPE panel, and doesn't say recommend replacing it, just keep it in your mind, your client probably wants to replace that panel. It's got issues. And Zinsco, in the last 15 years, I've only seen 3 Zinsco panels. I have seen dozens of Federal Pacific panels. And Federal Pacific panels are very common in the, from the 60s all the way into probably the mid-80s, when they then went into a class action suit and went out of business. Electrical Power Service Review 2, inspect and identify wiring conductor type, main and branch circuit. Majority of all feed lines going into houses are copper. There are some aluminum. Those were built in the early 70s, when you say, Larry?
Yep.
The 70s in that time period.
Yep.
Aluminum was thought to be the best thing going, since copper was at that time expensive. Think how expensive it is today. But aluminum, if aluminum is there, your main feed's coming off the panel, or coming to the panel from Georgia Power or from whomever supplies, Swanee Electric, whoever, it's going to be aluminum most of the time. Just about 90% of the time. Sometimes you may find copper feed, but they're not going to spend the amount of money it takes to pick a copper feed from the primary supports of the street into the house. And then the branch circuitry you're talking about, and that's the branch circuitry is what feeds virtually throughout the house.
Is that an issue?
Aluminum wiring inside the house is an issue. It is an issue based upon the fact that the expansion and contraction, number 1, of the material, so far as the feeds to the various receptacles, expansion and contractions, you can loosen your connectivity to that, and then an arcing issue develops. Electrical fires most of the time occur due to an arcing issue and a failure for solid contact.
You're talking about aluminum inside the house.
Aluminum inside the house. Aluminum
Coming
from
to the house is no
Yeah,
problem.
to the house is not a problem. It's a very large strand wire. It's lugged down extremely tight, expected to be. And then there's also what's called a corrosive retardant material on there, because you can get some issues with with current going through aluminum into copper. And I don't know, get into that kind of detail for you, but those also have issues in it. We're checking for electrical systems, AFCIs and GFCIs. We hadn't mentioned AFCIs yet, but AFCIs, arc fault circuit interrupt. They are required on all houses today for just about everything throughout the house. In 2003, they became a requirement to be used in all bedroom sleeping areas where circuitry is supplied. And this does not just apply to the receptacles on the wall, it also includes the light fixture. It says circuitry, it doesn't say receptacles. So GFCI, pretty common. That's what you commonly see GFCIs today. AFCIs are breakers. They are specifically in the panel, and they'll have a button definition, and typically will say on there AFCI. There is today AFCI, GFCI combination breakers that are used for new construction, and fundamentally they are in combination with kitchen areas only, because kitchen areas are required to be GFCIs, and the engineers have been able to devise a breaker that functions in both capacities. Arc fault means arcing. GFCI is grounding. Grounding systems protect you, it's a personal protection. Arc fault systems is a protection for the structure itself and reducing fire opportunity. Check all accessible power receptacles throughout the house, as well as switches. Flipping switches, try to at least see what it turns on, what it turns off, and if it works. And I've seen those that are floppy, and those that are floppy just need to be replaced. They're just wore out. Inspect smoke and other detection systems. Smoke alarm systems today are required throughout the house. Every level of the house has to have a smoke alarm, smoke detector system in place, each level. In a sleeping area, it has to be within 10 foot of the door and has to be in the room. They all have to be wired, hardwired together. When one sounds, they all sound. And that's probably one of the things that I find most common is it's an issue when one sounds, they don't all sound.
They have to be hardwired?
Today they have to be hardwired. Now, you get before that, you've got grandfathering issues. I mean, obviously a house was built in the 70s and even into the maybe early 80s. They're probably not going to be, if they're there at all, from the builder standpoint, won't be hardwired. But you can hardwire them, and it's recommended. They still have a battery backup on them, and they will beep when the battery goes left. dead.
I'm not gonna
Today,
keep beeping when you take the battery out. I thought it was possessed.
yeah, you take the battery out and let you know.
And then
it's-
they
it's
also
gonna
beep,
fact.
beep, beep.
So, two other things about them. Today, they're not only smoke detection systems, but they're carbon monoxide.
Oh.
Number two, regardless of when the house was built, if they're in place and they're more than 10 years old, replace them. The sensor devices on them have a limited to 10 years functional use. After 10 years, that sensor device begins to deteriorate, and even though you may go up and punch the button and it squawks, it does not mean that it's going to be able to pick up any kind of particulate that's in the air related to carbon or fire issue, and maybe even carbon monoxide. So I have a common statement that I use. Richard probably uses the same thing. If it's 10 years old, replace it, period, even if it sounds. Smoke detectors in proper locations, we talked about that. Warnings for regardless of time of period of original construction. Before 2007, detectors were required within 10 foot of the space. So if the house was built prior to 2007, the requirement at that point was it had to be within, for the sleeping areas, had to be within 10 feet of the sleeping area, the doorway going into it. So if you got a hallway that's 15 feet long and you got one down here, you got to have one down here too for those bedrooms. 2007 had additional in each bedroom and hallway and hardwired, all hardwired. Fireplaces. Builders today, at least I can say back, I'm mostly back down towards Atlanta, and Larry and Richard are more to this part of the city. Builders today quit putting masonry fireplaces in houses probably 15, 20 years ago. Today, from that point forward, they were prefabricated, which basically meant the firebox and everything was made and was brought in, and then instead of, they might put a brick chimney up, they might put a casing like an exterior siding material framing up, and then a metal flue pipe up. Today, what I'm finding more than anything else are prefabricated fireplace sealed front inserts with a vent to the exterior, no chimney at all. Finding that. But I mean, you find thousands of houses, however, that are, this basically is a cutaway of a masonry chimney. Basically, when I'm looking at a fireplace that's a wood burning fireplace, let's look at it that way, because that's really what we're first looking at, is a wood burning fireplace. We're looking at the condition of the fire blocking material, ceramic border on the inside, or fire brick, and the condition of the grout or whatever. Looking up as best I can into the chimney flue to see if I can see any evidence of a creosote buildup. Creosote is a naturally occurring element from the wood, from burning solid wood. You get soot, and after a period of time you get creosote. Creosote is a fire that won't stop until it's smothered. It will burn hotter than anything that you can imagine, and most fires that happen in chimneys today come because of that reason. But we're looking basically at the general condition of the fireplace, and it's always recommended, if it's a wood burning fireplace, to have somebody who specializes to come and clean it, even if it was cleaned 2 weeks ago. Screen glass front protections, things of that nature, you want a barrier there to protect, for instance, in flue cleaning, soot, gas starter operational. I usually don't start a gas starter. If it's something that's switched, I will turn it on. If it's not switched, I will identify that it's there. I will look at the starter bar to see if it is, it looks to be in reasonable condition. And if I don't detect a gas issue beyond that point, I consider it to be, reasonably acceptable. I don't think it will use fireplaces. Maybe in this area, maybe more so. It more is an aesthetic thing than anything else. Can be. And also, gas log inserts. I mean, not gas logs, but fireplace, buck stoves, those types of inserts. Don't really, can't do a whole lot to those, other than just look at them for general condition issues. Foundations. We deal with 3 different types of foundations today. Majority of them are slabs. Builder's going to put on slab, I'll put it on basement. Most builders today do not build on crawl spaces, but they do on occasion, and they do in town when they're taking down the old 1920s, 1930s, 1940s bungalow and putting the McMansion up. And typically they'll put that on a basement. But block foundations, poured foundations, the 2 common materials. Most builders today do not use block foundations. They're highly porous, they're more susceptible to water intrusion, and they're much more expensive to put in because of the exceeding labor cost. Poured foundation, which is the picture that you see in the middle. I can't tell you specifically if this will end up becoming a basement. I would say this area not, possibly this area probably not. It just hasn't had the slab put in. This is more than likely going to be a crawl space. Crawl spaces require vapor barriers, minimal. I mean, that's been around a fairly long length of time, but it's in code today. If you're going to build a crawl space area, then you want to put a vapor barrier down to basically reduce any moisture wicking into that area. The picture here on this side, obviously we're showing it's a combination. You've got poured foundation wall, and then above this you have basically framing that's part of the foundation as well, that's above grade. Supply methods accessible, you know, and we're looking at identification so far as accessibility, crawl spaces, all those things have to have a certain degree of accessibility. Report on structural concerns found, and we'll get into that. Rebar designs, this has to do with looking at a pre-pour on a foundation button there. Vapor barrier placement, which I commented earlier, and soil compaction. Also, compaction really has more to do with the footing itself than anything else. All right, cracks, crackology, insights on cracks. Block foundations. Number one problem with a block foundation is a horizontal crack. Your inspectors, if there's a horizontal crack in that foundation, especially, in a basement, he needs to tell you about it, and he needs to tell you need to get an engineer, because that crack was not built into it, and that crack represents a hydraulic pressure that basically is beginning to displace that foundation wall, and that's an expensive problem. You see what's called a shear crack at the bottom. You also find certain types of vertical cracks. You see two there, a vertical crack that runs from the top running down. That is a stress crack element and also can be a potential problem, and you want to defer that to a structural specialist, an engineer, or PE. The other is a step line crack. Find those probably more common. That does represent a subtle shift. It doesn't necessarily mean that you've got a significant foundation problem, but depending upon the size of the crack, how it trails, any particular element of displacement that's in place there is potentially an issue and still probably worth looking at. Crack on a slab in a basement, large monolithic slabs will develop shrink cracks, not uncommon at all. The thing that we're concerned about with cracks of this type is its size and the potential displacement, meaning one surface being higher than the other. And when you have those kind of issues, then it becomes more problematic. Why is that happening? You can get a crack, you can get a subtle crack, it'll come off. If you've got an inside corner, that crack could trail slightly off that inside corner. That's not unusual. But when we get into other areas, these are hairline cracks. We typically don't see this as a problem, although that's an issue with a foundation wall that's had a small, that's had a mastic material covered over. It's a hairline crack, probably is of no great issue. This kind of crack becomes a bigger issue. The spacement, the movement, the opening of the crack gives you an indication that something is going on there. An inspector can look at this marginally with a rod or a pole or something to thump it to see if one side sounds hollow and the other side doesn't. That probably warrants further examination. Oh. And then if you get a crack like this, you say, just fill it up, it's, okay. No, obviously this is an issue. Now, this is a slab floor. If you can see this, then you're going to report it. But if it's a slab floor and it's got a wood floor over it, generally on a slab floor, if it's got wood, it's going to be either engineered type if it's actually wood, or it's going to be maybe a laminate type material. Obviously something of this size is going to telegraph itself through to the top. If it's got carpet over it, the most you're probably going to detect is maybe some variation in the feel of it, but If you can get an access to a point and see where that comes about, then that's a problem. That is a problem. And that can be very expensive to correct, obviously. Exterior inspections dealing with landscape, finish siding, brick. Anyone have a question about anything that we've just gone through here? I'm pushing through these things because we've got so much material, but I don't want to, if you have a question, just chime out and we'll touch base on it. Landscaping, finishing, siding, brick veneers, fireplaces, which would actually, in this case, we're talking about the chimney, gutters and decks. Trees, shrub location, where they're found around the house. Anything that's within 10 foot of a foundation wall can be problematic, regardless of how old it is. If it's not old and it's left there, it's going to get old and it will probably affect the foundation very likely at some point in time. Obviously, you can see here this is an issue. Tree contact to roofs, siding materials, that basically is no different than sandpaper. Over the course of time, it'll wear away roof material, it'll wear away siding material. It is a highway for vermin into the house, guaranteed. Insects, it doesn't matter. In contact like this, it's an issue. Overgrown shrubbery. All of those things have issues involved with them. All right, different siding materials. Commonly today we find basically 3 or 4, let's say 4 different types. Cement fiber board. Hardy Plank is a brand name. There are other people who make cement fiber board materials out there, so I don't call it Hardy Plank because it could be Nichiwa, it could be something from any number of other people out there that are currently now making a fiber board or a cement fiber board material. The other materials, obviously brick siding material. You have you have vinyl siding material. The older siding material that's been out there for a long time, that's still out there, that's problematic, are materials that are basically wood-based, composition material. Those are Omni board, Masonite bead board, any type of OSB board, and including LP siding, because LP is a type of OSB board. OSB means oriented strand, basically flake board type materials, okay? All right, I'm going to give you some indications about brick issues. The National Brick Institute for many years has had an installation requirement that you have weak tubes or ability to relieve air pressure or air elements between the sheathing material of the house framing board and the brick material. Brick does not abut itself to the house. It's attached to the house through a strapping material, and you have a void in there that ranges roughly 1.5 inches to 2 inches, depending on how good the mason is. In that aspect of it, today you have a vapor barrier in there that can potentially have condensation to develop between the two areas. Because of that, there are several different methods to allow that air, a certain amount of airflow in there to eliminate that moisture, because you do have flashing material along various areas. The most common thing that I come across today is where we've got, this is a weak tube, above grade as required. This is a weak tube, this is a weak tube, that in the finished grade they brought the soil line back up to the weak tube and covered it. Then the weak tube does opposite of what it's intended to do. It allows moisture in, it doesn't allow moisture out. These are some of the things that we commonly look for in location. These tubes are also around windows and around doors. In exterior exam, okay. OSB material, this is an OSB siding material. The majority of all of your wood product siding materials have a problem that's innate with lack of maintenance, number one. Number two, lack of proper installation. In this particular case, what we're seeing here is an OSB board that was cut too close and allowed to rest upon the shingling of the house, and over the course of time it's absorbed moisture and it's deteriorated. So, most issues. Hardboard siding, wood composition, MDF, which is medium density fiberboard, which falls in kind of the old Masonite paper material, which is, it's not like paper, but it's close to it. OSB and LP, and then of course wood. Wood will also do this, by the way. Even if it's cedar, it'll do this. LP, Louisiana Pacific. Don't see as much of it today as you do probably 20 years ago. The one thing about LP's Louisiana Pacific is they put their name on it. I mean, up front. If you look, LP Siding has a notch signature right here, and that signature spells LP. So Louisiana Pacific made a product that they felt was just the best thing since cut sliced bread, and it became sliced bread. In any case, if you see, if LP Siding is out there, hopefully your inspector is knowledgeable enough as to, when you're looking at OSB siding material, to look for this and look to see if it's in place. And within the last 14 months, I have found a house with this on it. So it's still out there. Other siding materials, cement fiberboard, which would come in on brick, vinyl siding, metal siding materials. Don't see much metal siding material much anymore. Aluminum siding would have been what most people did. Believe it or not, there's actually steel siding out there. I can attest to that because my dad worked with the steel industry and we had steel siding on our house. And I'm sure it must have lasted a long time until the paint gave away. The other course we're looking at here is a masonry material, which is actual dry stack, real stone in this particular case. This is cement fiberboard. This is one of the most common profiles of cement fiberboard, although it comes in a variety of other variations today, which included shape, shingle, appearance, look, all that kind of thing, but this is cement fiberboard. The distinguishing difference that you can find right away is the thickness of the material. Cement fiberboard, typically, would you say what it's about 3/8 to 5, about a half an inch thick, maybe?
Yeah, it's
At
much
most.
thinner than that.
It's much thinner than the OSB type materials, which typically run probably 5/8 to 3/4 of an inch thick. And when you look at OSB material or other type of material, when you look at the bottom side of it, it'll give away because it's already cracking and breaking. Okay. Stucco. Stucco is a very common siding material for a lot of houses today. The only thing that's real stucco is the application of the material to masonry. That's real stucco. Everything else is a simulation of it. The two types that are most common today are what's called hard coat, and then the other one is a synthetic stucco, and we'll talk about that shortly. Hard coat simply is that a hard coat gypsum board and then the application of the various levels of finished material to create the stucco exterior. There are standards that are expected to be in place with the installation of this. It cannot terminate in the ground. And I'll guarantee you, if we went 2 miles from here and found a stucco house, it'll terminate in the ground. It has to terminate above ground with a proper weeping to allow for moisture expulsion. Exterior, EIFS. Exterior insulation finish systems, that's what EIFS represents, which is a synthetic stucco. Basically, instead of a hardboard gypsum board, it's put on a sponge, which basically is styrofoam. And to that point, when it's not installed correctly, it absorbs moisture. Moisture stays there. And you can imagine what it does. Two elements to be easily detected. Peeling is a potential issue that you can find with some of these material, but with EIFS material or synthetic stucco, you tap on it. If it sounds hard and solid, it probably is maybe hard coat. If it sounds hollow, more than likely it's a synthetic. You can push on it, and if it gives slightly, it probably is soft or simulated types of materials. All right.
Question.
Yes.
Are you telling me that both stucco systems, hard coat and the
EIFS or synthetic stucco
synthetic
are problematic.
that need to terminate above grade?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Is that right?
Period.
They all have to terminate above grade. It's been in the code for a long time. There are also
Yeah, I know about the synthetic, but I didn't think the hard coat
Yeah.
had to be terminated.
the issue
above
with it
grade.
is that when it gets below grade, it's not unlike masonry where it is at the base level of a masonry exterior brick material. It basically uses a ledge element of the foundation at this beginning starting point, and therefore it has a support system. The others, they don't. They're just cladded materials, just like siding material.
Yeah, I know the termites used to get up through the synthetic stucco, through
And they'll do the
through
same
the
thing.
foam. But with a hard coat, you're right against the OSB board and wire and all that stuff.
But you cannot ensure that it's terminated correctly. So there's a weep system that's supposed to be installed.
Gotcha.
And then,
Okay.
I went past that picture relatively quick, but it's in that diagram. There is a weep screed that runs across the front of it. Here are two other elements. The first picture that you see is an OSB board. The bottom is LP siding. All I had to do is look at the gutter and know what the rest of the house is going to look like. But anyways, LP siding, Louisiana Pacific, moisture contamination, all those things take place. All right, hard coat. This is the house that I looked at about 2 years ago. It's about a $1.5 million house, 4-sided hard coat stucco. I do not do stucco inspections, and I don't know if Richard does this type of thing or not, but there's a training. Larry does stucco inspections. There's a training procedure, and it's a probative inspection, and it's a lengthy inspection, especially a house this size. I went through the house and I did the primary inspection of everything in the house, and one of my associates came out and did a stucco inspection. When we got to the backside corner of the house, we noticed an area that you're seeing right here. Oh, I'm sorry, the back one. I don't want to show you that one yet. We'll take a look at that one. Get my point out. We start seeing this little spot right here. Said, okay, well, that's obviously something going on. And when we get, this is what we were seeing from the ground, right there, until we were able to get a little bit closer with the camera binoculars. This is what the inside looked like. Stuccos have a particular type of flashing material that has to be in place in order to divert water, especially when you have a transition between a vertical wall and asphalt siding material, asphalt roofing material that's in place. If it's not done properly, water gets in, it will deteriorate, and it'll cause problems. The client did not buy this house. But they bought another house, very nicely. Very nice house. Very good. Yeah. No, it wasn't stucco. Decks. As of 2014, Georgia issued a prescriptive on decks, saying that decks have to conform to a standard of which they provide or an engineered system. Engineering simply means that it is designed by an engineer, has an engineered seal on it, and has been approved by the municipality that oversees that. Okay? That is a beautiful deck. That deck has got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 arrows without even me walking under it, that I can tell you right away. They're in place. Your railing has no newel posts. It's all supported by pickets. Not acceptable. Cannot be done. It's hard to see there, but at this corner right here, this deck is applied against a brick veneer. You cannot put a deck on a brick veneer without it being what's called freestanding. Cannot be done. The Georgia prescriptive requires a limited distance off of the house main framing that mounting ledger board, which is the board that's, don't pull the blinds in, I just let me close that down because I think that blind is, they must see that one back there. Okay, well that's okay. Well, all right, that's it. Anyway, back here you've got a mounting ledger board. There's a board that basically acts as the attachment element for the deck to the house. It cannot be more than 1.5 inches off of the mounting ledger board of the house. Covered. There we go. There we go.
So the ledger board has to be fastened to the house, and then the brick comes up underneath it then?
That would be the process. Correct. All right. The other thing that I can't see is what kind of flashing is there, but that at this point is kind of irrelevant. This girder support beam is not designed correctly at all. You cannot do it that way. It has to have direct bearing on this post, and it has to be doubled. And if this post, I can't tell if that post is a 4x4, it's the wrong size to start with. But if it's a 6x6, actually it probably have to be bigger than that to be able to be notched and put your double boards on there. Anyway, the way that's installed is incorrect. Number 2, there is no center stringer on those steps. Number 3, there is no graspable handrail on either
That center
side.
stringer, is that based on the width of the step, or?
It's based upon the fact of the step design.
So everyone has to have a center stringer, whether it's.
Here are your stringers right here. You got your side stringers.
Yeah, I know.
Right there, and then you have another stringer up there. Well, the steps themselves have to be a minimum of 30 inches wide. That's number 1. And then number 2, once you do that, it has to have a center stringer on it.
Wow.
It has no graspable handrail. And there probably are several other things that I, just because I'm looking at the picture. Let me flip this next string. It's a 22-page outline detail for decks. The new construction don't often go this distance, but I went to Dalton last year on probably about a $1.5 million house. And a monstrous deck on this thing, and the guy did everything wrong. And let me say this goes about code. There is no municipality in the state that decides not to enforce a particular code. It's a state mandate. The county, the municipality, wherever, and this is what the builder says, well, we don't do that up here in Dawson County. We don't, the inspector don't require that. And I told the client, I says, I don't care what Dawson County does. The state of Georgia says this is what's got to be done.
So is this Georgia or federal we're talking about here?
This would be state of Georgia.
Georgia.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know that there are any really federal guidelines.
Well.
I mean, all these things pretty much are left to the states where they manage it. In any case, as you can see, DCA stopped Georgia. I mean, I know you don't have time to write all this down, but this information is available online from the DCA stategeorgia.us.gov, etc. on down the line. Development. I mean, the codes are there, and you can pick them up. I mean, they go back numbers of years as to what the requirements are. Okay. IRC step and riser requirements. There's a requirement for the riser, the length of the rise of the step, and the depth of the step. There's a code requirement to that. There are minimums and maximums. Maximum riser height is 7 3/8 inches, and you cannot have a variation between the bottom step and the top step by more than 3/8 of an inch. That's the new Georgia implemented a variation in the step depth to 10 inches from, Larry, was that 2014 that they made the change? Because at one time Georgia would allow a step you go about 9 to 9.5 inches, I think, and then Georgia then went into what the IRC has been talking about all along, a 10-inch step depth. In any case, today, any new construction steps cannot be less than 10 inches deep.
So you can't use a 2x10 anymore, you gotta use a...
Yeah, you gotta use the old, gotta make it big enough for our bigger feet. Okay. This is an older tread design. This, and you can see the date on that was 2010. But in any case, and there's also a requirement dealing with handrails, and I won't get really involved more so in that. Okay, are we up to the next? This is the next one. Okay.
Yeah, just
Okay. Let me get over
there
here
you
to
go.
that.
And just click.
All right. 47 inspection problems in 3 minutes. I know you love to see this. Is there sound?
Oh, I hope so. Yeah.
Supposed to go down, not up.
What is that, right on there?
Moisture meter.
Moisture meter, okay.
Oh. Anybody know what that is? It's an S-trap,
Trap.
among other things. Really?
Somebody's dream house, huh? Dream home.
Yeah, he's
Is that
doing
all in one house?
Everybody takes their own course of responsibility.
Wasn't like that before the inspection.
Yeah.
He's really.
Oh, no.
just installed it.
Not
It
good.
doesn't work.
Get a little dust pressure around.
But it was,
Yeah, you just hit it again and it'll pop out of YouTube.
All right.
and Mr. Smith's gonna take us from here.
Yeah, and if anybody needs a 5-minute nature break, if nature's calling, we could take 5 minutes and just go from here. We're going to start in 5 minutes. Yeah,
All right.
slate. Slate is hanging around $700, $800 a square. So metal is more expensive than the slate. I just think the slate would leak a little bit more if it isn't installed just right. But if it is installed just right, I don't suppose it will ever leak. It won't rust.
If it's installed right, it'll last 1,000 years.
1,000 years, I believe it. I believe it. Over across the pond, we know that they last 1,000 years.
But doesn't the understructure have to be a lot sturdier than?
Yeah, it's taking on a lot more weight. Sure, sure is. So, the more angles in a roof, the more hips and valleys and siding projections through a roof is where you're going to get the majority of the problems that come up with roofs. We're going to buzz by that. You can tell that had a lot of problems. This, obviously, you have cracks and curling on roof shingles. We'd be mentioning some things about that. This was patched, probably had a water leak, there's no doubt. And then, of course, the cracks and the damage on chimney flues. Peeling shingles, discoloration is an indication that it's a little bit older and maybe the zinc came out of the shingle and it tends to stain or gain mold. It's functionally basically fine. But if it's really bad in some areas, a regular home inspector may just refer that to a roofer. Lack of flashing, sometimes we can't tell if flashing is there, but we're supposed to be able to see it. It's supposed to kick out. If it kicks out and it looks like it's designed to dispose the water on top of the roof, we hardly ever see a problem. If you don't see the flashing, it doesn't mean it isn't there, but it may not be done properly, and that's when we actually take a second look and try to find if there are any leaks from it.
Question, how do you inspect the roof? Do you go up on the roof?
The industry standard does not require a home inspector to go up on a roof.
Okay.
Different home inspectors do different things according to the height and the pitch of the roof. If it gets above a 9, 12, I won't climb on it. If it's not too high, I'll put a ladder up against it, but we're not insured to go up on roofs.
More people are using drones now. I mean, it's great to have good
Yeah.
visibility to
Yeah,
bring it up,
technology.
buzz it around, and take pictures. And
Are home inspectors using drones then, in general? or
Some, very few.
Some
Very few.
Very few. Yep, and a note about brick. There's a flashing detail in brick that's of special note. We have, on the left side, you see the step flashing. That has step flashing only. You can see the different pieces. And then you can see the end of it actually pops out, maybe into the gutter. And that would be good. But the needed flashing is on top of that, and it's the counter flashing. And the top edge, if I can keep my hands steady enough, that top edge, no I can't. That top edge of each individual section is actually supposed to be embedded into the brick. The brick scored, it molded in and sealed up in there so you don't get water behind. This caulking edge actually will have will crack over time, and it's a maintenance issue. So brick is a little bit more difficult to flash than, say, a concrete-based siding. Everybody's heard of the Atlas Chalet. Atlas Chalet is it's starting to go away a little bit just because of time. Atlas Chalet shingles have been replaced, but for a period of, if a roof actually starts leaking within a year with Atlas Chalet, then they obviously, it's a roof problem, shingle problem, they can have that replaced. But they're not making them anymore, so it's a moot issue as far as that's concerned. It led to a class action lawsuit because there were a lot of Atlas Chalet shingles that were recalled. Well, it wasn't actually a recall. And they went to litigation, but it isn't actually a lawsuit. So it's not a class action suit where everybody can just say, hey, I got Atlas Chalet, please replace it, and they will. You actually have to have evidence that it's defective with a leak or visible pitting and cracking. While I'm thinking about it, I actually want to say polybutylene had a class action lawsuit in a recall. Atlas Chalet are the two big ones. And then, of course, Louisiana Pacific, who got the brunt of all the pressboard siding issues. There are a lot of recalled items. I guess there's maybe 1,000 of them. Home inspectors are not required to list every recalled item that you have on there. It's nice if it's mentioned because it had an issue like polybutylene and these type shingles. But if it's less than 5 years old, then you can usually get a complete replacement of the shingle if you're having a problem. Certainteed, Horizon shingles also had a problem. Owens Corning Supreme shingles also said to have had the same type of problem, and that is pitting, cracking, flaking. This is actually some Atlas Chalet shingles that we have. And you can see the difference between the Atlas Chalet. If you can look through the picture, if you can look at that picture, I don't know what I just did. All right, if you can look through the picture, behind all the money, you can
Check
see.
the next slide, which I think.
I don't think it's a good picture.
That's,
The
yeah.
top one is a good picture of the Atlas Chalet. The bottom one is a picture of pitting. And this is, you can see it's a 3-tab shingle. You can see the 3 tabs in there. If you look at a roof, you can actually see the separation in the double lines going up behind, at the next to each shingle that's about 1 foot wide. And you can see those lines going up every other shingle it overlays. But it also has a dimensional feel, so it's actually a faux architectural shingle. And this right here, you can see the blistering that happens. We can hesitate to put it down on the table because it may. Is this a good, strong table? This is, I think.
Pretty good.
But you can take a look at that, and you can see the pitting right there. It blisters. The overlay property of this actually wasn't applied properly, and it actually, water gets underneath there. And I heard that when water gets underneath there, that it doesn't look like it's leaking from the underside, and actually what happens, it rots out the top half of the roof decking, so your decking gets weak and soft without you even getting a leak on the house. But you can see a crack right here in this one. And these are the two typical problems that Atlas Chalet has. And so it is a 3-tab shingle. It's a dimensional texture. It's a faux architectural, so it does actually look like an architectural shingle. At first you look at it and say, oh, nice architectural roof, but it's not. It's a 3-tab.
Richard,
Yeah.
can I just ask Joey? I haven't touched on this subject in quite a while, so I'd help getting a refresher on it. But years ago in a real estate contract, and I don't, it was like paragraph, I don't know, 12, 13, 14, somewhere in there, but it said something about if
Excuse me.
any defects that have been known, you know, and they specifically called out polybutylene plumbing and all that stuff. But it says in there, and I don't know if it still does, but if the buyer has been notified prior to contracting to purchase. So if in those disclosures, if any of those known defects, like Atlas Chalet or polybutylene are in there, then basically they're being told that you know, all bets are off. You've been
Right.
told. So
Yeah, you know, they've changed those disclosures, and we were missing a lot of things, like, aren't we missing the class action suit paragraph? So No.
So
You're
it's not
also
in there
missing
anymore.
age of shingles, age of
Most
HVACs,
sellers
age of water heaters.
will
Yeah,
tell
which I
you.
thought was very
I
important.
can go
from
into
the
a
get-go.
house and if I'm listing it and I'll walk around and I can identify polybutylene, I can identify LP, and you tell sellers they've got it. Now, some are totally unaware.
Right. They don't
Some
know there's
will
a problem.
say they're unaware. They actually participated in the class action lawsuit. got
got the
30
money.
grand to reside the house and went out and bought a new F-150 truck instead. But most sellers,
Today don't.
most sellers are either rightly
They
or
don't have anything
wrongly
about that at
totally
all.
unaware that they've got polybutylene. They'll tell you that they don't know there's any problems with stucco, and they'll tell you that LP, what's that? They have no idea.
Let's carry on. Anything installed between 2000, well, they're typically installed, not any shingle, but the Atlas Chalet was installed between 03 and 09. So that's actually different now. When we were setting this up, it's actually 8 to 14 years. So the shingle is getting old naturally anyway, and it's being replaced just because it's old. Atlas logo is on the cellophane. If you noticed on the back of this, if you flip over that shingle, this is really the telltale sign to make sure you got either Atlas Chalet or Owens Corning or whatever.
You got a picture in
You
there.
flip up, you flip up the side of the, at the rake, you flip that up and look in there and that's what you see. You actually see Atlas. And that is a cellophane strip that'll stay on most every shingle. So you get cracking and blistering is likely. But I have found that if the roof is about a 9/12 pitch or steeper, that water sheds off and I don't see the cracking, even though it is Atlas Chalet. They're still up there, they're still fine, they're still good. I will notify my client if I verify that it is Atlas Chalet, but I'll say it appears like it's in good condition because I can't visually see any problem, especially if there's no leak underneath or blistering and cracking on top. Gutters, just FYI, if you see rust at the bottom of gutters, it's at the end of their estimated useful life. They usually last 30, 35 years-ish, and then they need to be replaced. And then flashing around fireplaces, fireplace caps you need. What you're looking for in fireplaces, you need a top, and it would be good to have, you need a cap, you need a top also. And that top, actually, if it protrudes past the siding, particularly in the pressboard siding around chimneys is the first to go, just because their top does not protrude out past the siding. It has no protection from a mist, a light rain that comes down. It always gets wet on everything. Brick chimneys actually have the mortar sloped on top, so that's their top, but it doesn't protrude out past, and you'll get this. It's called spalling. It's when the moisture gets inside the brick and it freezes. You get the rain and then the ice storms, and it'll pop the edges of the brick apart. So you get that, but you're looking for a straight chimney, and you're looking for one that has the proper flashing around it. That's a step flashing, kick-out flashing.
Is that more susceptible in a chimney environment than the rest of the house?
Basically because of the top of the chimney, not the cap, but the top that actually proceeds over.
There are two
protrudes
issues.
Over.
There are two issues.
siding.
It has to do partly with the age of the brick in itself and the way it was made out and fired. Some older bricks are like this. They're just, for whatever the material composition that they used along with the clay, absorb moisture. I see this more with properties that are probably pre-1970. And we get brick that was just not made well. And then it absorbs moisture and basically does this. I mean, obviously this is an exaggeration of the picture
Right.
that you're
And
seeing.
if you
here.
notice, there's no overhang from an eaves or just the edge of a roof. There's nothing protecting that from any rain at all. Chimney cap is in good shape. We'll check that. No obstruction from trees, close, fire hazard, so forth. All right. The key areas that we have found, what we did is at a meeting, we polled all the home inspectors there, and we calculated that there were over 100,000 home inspections done by this group of inspectors there. And we found The things that actually are the biggest concern for buyers, and that is the foundation. Foundation cracks just because you don't know if it's a soil problem and fixing it, and the cost of fixing it is really the basic of this. Fungal growth, that could be as simple as just getting a cleaner and wiping it off to unlimited numbers of dollars. Major renovation. And then water damage kind of goes hand in hand with the mold. Water damage is replacing the damaged parts, and then making sure the fungal is out. Roof gets old. It's going to get old anyway, whether it's a defective shingle or not, and you have to budget for a 20-year roof to be replaced in about 15 to 20 years. So, and a normal size house, a 2,500 square foot house may start at around $10,000 to replace a roof. So there is a significant cost to that, along with the HVAC. If it's old, it's working, we can tell you it's working, we can tell you it's old. We can't tell you when it's going to quit. So that's something to make sure you're aware of. And then vermin. Often if you got critters in the attic, that usually starts at $1,000 to, on a medium, small house, to actually seal all the edges off and guarantee that you're not going to have critters in the attic. And then electrical issues. Electrical issues typically aren't very expensive until you get to that pre-70s house where you actually have to change out the panel and wire the whole house. So that's where it gets expensive.
Average panel is probably going to run you in the range of around $1,500, give or take.
Yep.
That's kind of an average.
For a home inspector identifying problems around a house, sure, freshly painted houses are nice, but it just kind of throws a flag up. The best way for us to inspect a house is if you clear everything away from it, don't paint it. Any stains there will lead us to other areas to make sure we actually find the cause and so forth. So, so that's just painted. Yards, thanks for cutting the grass. If you ever can cut the grass, have the grass cut before an inspector gets out there.
Can be more than just dog poop out there.
Yeah, there could be a lot of things that you could be stepping in. Masking heavier caulked areas. I have seen someone, the bottom of a post, it's a truss house, so it wasn't really structural, bottom of a post, they put paper around it, painted it, and it looked good. It was just paper thin. It was just it was just the paint holding up the post. It was just cosmetic. Erosion around the foundation. If you have bushes up against the house, lots of pine straw, they can fill up those holes where you can see the funneling of water going down up against the foundation. So outside cleaning, it just gives a better home inspection. Preparing the house for a home inspection, full access to all the wall areas, make sure they're not blocked, locked, or covered. We run into this a lot, just not being able to get to things that we need to inspect. We might touch a little bit more about that. Feel free to fix any damaged items prior to the inspection, but definitely do not just cover it up. Don't paint something that you see was stained. Make sure the leak was fixed, and then you can just paint it. It's cosmetic at that point if we know it's not leaking. Thanks in advance for cutting the grass. Please extract any critters in crawl spaces or attics that are living there before we get there. That would be wonderful. I request that you don't paint, so you can actually see what's going on better, and that you don't do any bug exterminating. Personally, I don't like crawling through all the chemicals. And accessible areas. Some areas we can't see. Most inspectors will take pictures of things like this. Realtor's lockbox key, that will help. These are all things to prepare and get the obstacles out of the way before you have an inspection done. CBS code, make sure it's correct and the inspector has it. Contractor's lockbox code is correct and it's in a location that we can find it. These are all answers from inspectors that are just dying for us to get this information out there. Deadbolt keys, back side of the house, you got one to get in, you can get in, but you can't get that back door open because that key isn't available or even exists sometimes. Heavily cluttered rooms like you see here, attics and basements. Locked garage doors or crawl space doors, anything that's locked, we need access. Other obstacles, any electrical panels that have cabinets in front of them, stored items because they're ready to move, stored items leaning up against them, covered, we can't find them. We don't typically move personal items because we touch something, we don't know the value of it. And we don't know if we lay it up against something else, it pushes the chair over and it falls, and then you buy this great artwork piece. So keep everything away from the, I haven't done that yet. Keep everything away from the electrical panels so you can get it. If it's, you're not allowed to cover it with wallpaper or paint it because it has to be accessible, visible in an emergency for firefighters.
Removable.
And it's got to be removable. Physical barriers like shelves, or even dogs in garages. Oh, you don't need to go in the garage anymore? Let's just put that dog in. Let's put my 3 pit bulls in there. Okay, utility services at the time, make sure they're not locked. We talked about that before, or winterized. I can physically I can. You know, taking on a liability, I will often request an email or a text before I actually turn it on. And I have a systematic way of doing it. If it leaks, it might get a little water, but I turn it off, and I always leave it off. But it's not in a standard of practice that we're required to turn it on. So gas meters, well, that's the wrong picture. Some areas that are locked,
That picture right there.
we do not, if it is locked like this, even if it's, there might be some things, switches that are taped. We don't touch the tape. It may be for the computer system. A hot, cold receptacle. So if
Richard,
they
can I
make
briefly
those-
go back
yeah.
to the previous picture, because I'm not sure this, the previous picture that you're seeing there is an issue that we find when we have an outside main disconnect, and the homeowner feels like he needs to put a padlock on that panel cover. And that prevents us from opening that panel cover, sizing the system, looking at the connections that's behind it, number one. And number two, if you have a fire, that's going to slow the fireman down. It's not going to prevent him, because he'll come back with bolt cutters and he'll cut that thing off.
Or he'll take
slow
that
him
other thing
down.
off, pull the meter off. But
Yeah.
If it is locked, there's some cases on vacant homes. I do this on vacant homes. If I get to an electrical panel, I can tell there are pointed screws in an electrical panel. You're not supposed to put pointed screws in an electrical panel.
Yeah.
I will, on a vacant house, I will go to the outside if there's a disconnect there. I'll turn off the power, and I know there's no power in the box, and then I'll take the cover off and I'll mention that there's a point. But then if it's locked, I can't. So it does hinder everything. Make sure all the locks are off. Locks are off, even individual breakers. All right. This is just. Notice the cat. Notice the cat. What the cat is protecting. The house. So, if they have dogs, please remove them from the property. We're not babysitters. Sometimes front doors have a natural swing open. It doesn't latch. We're in and out of our car a lot, picking up stuff, tools, ladders. We get out. We're not responsible for keeping a cat inside the house. So crate it, take it, or let it roam. We'll do our best, but we're not going to be responsible for that. Issues on vegetation, we talked about that before, obstructing the roof. We might be able to move this slide around, different place. Degrade exterior materials, holds moisture, scratching, and then the root system actually will be intrusive on the siding and the roof material. All right, vegetation. Preparing a vacant house for a home inspection. This is the gas meter. Look at the gas meter, make sure it's unlocked, make sure it's on, make sure the water's on. You could do that by running, flushing toilets. Flush a toilet once. If the water is off, you have a thermal expansion tank. You turn it, you flush, might be locked off at the street, but the house is still pressurized. You flush the toilet, and the toilet will fill, it flushes, it's fine. Keep running the water. Flush it again. Turn water's on. It's not just one flush or turn it on. Oh, good, water's on. No, that's pushing the tank, pushing the water out. Winterized. If the house is winterized, you can't flush anything. Before de-winterizing, you have to have available heat. If it's a heat pump, you need to have power on and the heat needs to work. If it's a gas heat system, then you need to have gas on also. So that's something to keep in mind. And obstructions for an inspector. Very talkative buyers or realtors often slow down and hinder quality of the inspection or the reporting. We're responsible for what we report, not just what we inspect. The report is what counts. What we can inspect, we can talk about something, and we start writing it down or recording into our equipment. Then the buyer goes off, hey, look at this. You ever seen this? Is this bad? And then you go over there, and I didn't record it properly. And then, yeah, we both looked at it, we both talked about it, but it doesn't get into the reporting process. So if the buyer is there, we recommend that the realtor be there also. We recommend that the buyers come towards the end of the inspection to go over the findings. That is just some personal choice of some inspectors. It's not a standard or GAHI regulated thing. But when buyers come to the inspectors, realtors can help the buyers measure windows, rooms. They can walk around the house, find property boundaries, discuss the closings, and very important, let the inspector answer the questions. As soon as you start answering the questions about the house, you take on the liability of yourself, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So smile, don't be anxious when you see a home inspector there. It's good that the homeowner not be there, because they get anxious and they start asking, well, I took a picture. Oh, what's wrong over there? No, just observations. So if a smile is contagious, then so is anxiety, and they can feel that. So keeping realtors out of liability, we have 4 minutes. This is probably one of the most important things. I'll go real slow, see if you guys want to stay. Recommend a home inspection. That transfers the liability off of you, whether they use one or not. Recommending a home inspector actually is good faith on that realtor to actually transfer the liability. Do not say that an issue a home inspection mentions is no big deal. With the home inspector present or not present, realtors assume the responsibility of that issue at that point. It makes the home inspector unprofessional and reflects poorly on the referring realtor. Do not help the seller with their disclosure. I heard this from an attorney. You can get them started. You can say, fill out your name here, just write your name, and then all the rest, let them do. Because if you say, you look around, you don't see polybutylene, no, you don't have polybutylene. Realtor takes on the liability. The realtor filled this out for me. The realtor did this. No. If they don't know, check I don't know. But make sure that your hands are not in the disclosure of the property. Any additions and repairs, I heard from my insurance guy that the permits and the license of the contractor should go along with the closing papers. Disclose pest control services, I don't know, but my insurance guy told me about that. 3 referrals to a home inspector, you know the routine, making sure you don't have a home inspector in your pocket. How do you find a qualified home inspector? Well, there we go.
I don't know.
How do you find one?
Those are the yellow pages.
There you go.
What's that?
You can find a home inspector there. Won't guarantee his qualifications.
Suggest they get a homeowner's warranty. Now, whether you buy one for them or not, that's a realtor's business decision. But as long as you suggest it and let them know it's out there, it takes more liability off you also. Case in point. These are all very interesting. I got these from my insurance company. Real estate agent knew that the homeowner covered up cracks in the basement, sealed up with paint, and it was not disclosed. They said, just seal it up. Now there are foundation problems in both the previous seller and the realtor being sued. Homeowner painted over spots in the home, wet spots in the home. Notice that wet in there. Now there are issues with mold in the home, and the real estate agent alone is being sued because the buyer painted over wet spots. Probably the agent said, just paint that and it'll look good, it'll go away.
Yeah, but if he didn't do it with under the direction of the real estate agent, why is he being sued?
Yeah.
In this case, without more
Agent.
information,
Oh.
I think in this case it
Okay,
was. The realtor told me to do it. So the realtor, so they bypassed, the home inspector couldn't see it. We can only report on what we see. And the home inspector, the agent, is being sued in this case. New home buyer moved into a home and discovered mold in the home. The homeowner sued the real estate agent and the previous seller just because mold. The real estate agent company bought the house back from the buyer before it went to litigation. They just figured that's an easier way to deal with it.
Signed guilty.
Yes, sometimes, you know,
Possibly.
sometimes, I don't know. You know, that's just what happened in this case. And the purpose of this is to share with agents the issues of disclosing what you know, and don't hide anything. So, in closing, how do you find a qualified home inspector? The Georgia Association is the only home inspection association in the country that requires IRC code certification. And the way I describe IRC, it's essentially the bar for home inspectors. And we're in an association that has, all full members are only code certified. Oh, going the wrong way. And we talked about that. My clock says it's 12 o'clock. And does anybody have, I think it's 2 minutes to see what Clark Howard says about home inspections. My phone just went off, and we're right at 2 minutes. So let's see, let's take this and we can all go to lunch, right? Uh-oh. What'd I do, Will?
Back up one.
Yeah,
Just back up one. There you
There we
go.
go. Oh, no.
That's it. You're there.
Where's it coming from?
it's just coming from the laptop.
Audio.
Yeah, there's a, that's Mike Parkman that's there, by the way.
Current
Oh,
president.
Our current, he's our current president.
Turn the volume low.
Check out the guy or anything. A mistake that ended up costing him tens of thousands of dollars. Started finding more and more things. From the roof to the foundation. Stephen and his wife spent years making repairs the inspector never told them about. We felt like we were never really getting ahead in the house. When you're dealing with the largest purchase that a person may ever make in their life, there needs to be some agreement as to how high.
No, why didn't, oh, there he is, okay.
We need speakers.
Yeah, speakers, whatever, went mute, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, bummer.
Everybody lip read?
Yeah.
Pretty much.
You wanna know
So
what
it
it
Yes.
is,
Yeah,
what this
we
is saying,
understand.
essentially, it is a buyer beware state. There is no licensing for home inspectors. We are essentially, us and ASHI are the two big ones that actually self-regulate. So we are kind of like self-licensing, and the IRC is what we put our foundation under.
Similar to realtors and real estate agents.
Well, the other thing too,
Yeah.
on GAHI.com, this is obviously featured on there, but that's also a great resource for you. Obviously, search. One of the things we have on there is a tab is Find Inspector, and when you go to that tab, it simply says, what county are you in, and it gives a list of GAHI certified inspectors that you can leverage and use, as well as that video is on there too if you were missed to see any of that.
All right, so that's it. That's it. We had all the radon, mold, and asbestos, and termites, and all sorts of information, but that's it for today.
That is a possibility of something that we could, at a later point, provide as an additional information, because it's kind of those things that you come in contact with in a backward way. I mean, the inspector may comment that he sees evidence of what's called fungal growth. An inspector in general is not qualified to call it mold. Mold is a definition of a particular type of fungal material that's in place. So basically he should reflect the fact that if he sees suspicious element dealing with fungal growth, and that's what he calls it, and then refer it to further evaluation by a qualified person. The same thing applies to the other elements, and we touched briefly on lead-based paint and termite instances, and then asbestos. All of those things we can do a presentation on that. It wouldn't take probably more than about an hour to go through all those elements at some point. We're not asking to do that now, but we're saying, you know, somewhere down the road, it could be an additional presentation.
Or
And
we
just
could make
give you
it a
some
4
insight.
hour.
Do what?
Or we could make it a 4-hour CE class.
All right, yeah, if they would allow that, I don't know whether they want to
Well,
do that.
the other thing of those things up there, is there one particular one that you need more information on than the other?
Any of these
You know,
listed
whether it
here.
be termites, asbestos?
Before we get into that, from a liability point of view, it sound, where I'm going, what I think is, as a realtor, the pre-listing inspection basically would be a benefit to the listing agent, because it, hopefully all that inspection's done before they do all the painting and the fixing up and, you know.
That would be good. If
Well,
you're
it's
gonna
good for the
paint
seller
and fix,
also.
that it would be a great,
And no
great idea.
surprises
It-
come
it would
inspection
benefit-
time.
Yep, it would benefit the seller, and it would
Well,
also help fill out the disclosure statement. And it
Kind of
would
see it
help
in its
an awful lot
natural
of information.
form before it gets, quote,
That's the
fixed
way I would
up.
wanna see any house I bought. I'd wanna see it before it's fixed up. You
Okay.
can find things, you can,
Good
you know,
guy.
before you have to fix a wall, you might as well,
Yeah.
you know, you got a leak. Well, let's
We
rip the
should
wall
do
apart
cars
and
the
fix
same
it.
way.
Amen.
Yeah.
And one thing about,
Start a movement.
one thing about new construction, if somebody passes up on the, you know, the pre-drywall, pre-insulation inspection, and if they say, well, it's a new house, why have it inspected? The thing that the municipal inspectors won't do, before they do the CO, they won't come in, they don't have the time to test every receptacle outlet. They won't test the plumbing fixtures that have been attached to the plumbing, you know, for leaks. I mean, so, all of us, we go in there and we touch and test, you know, pretty much
Everything that operates.
everything.
Yeah, I actually was in Athens area yesterday, day before, and it was a new construction, and I just chew the fat with them about certain codes that we don't believe, you know, we can't believe it's that way and so forth. And there are a number of them that are just crazy. He said that he got a home inspection when he bought his house about a year ago, and he was the county inspector, and he got a home inspection by a home inspector. He said he goes in and he's got a number, 10 or 20 things that he focuses on real quick, and he's out. He doesn't have a systematic way to go through
Yeah.
and go right down the
It's
house
not
and get
as
everything
thorough.
taken care of.
Right.
It's not as thorough. Now, when he got the report back, he said, "Yeah, I knew that. I knew that. Oh, I can fix that. Oh, I knew that." And you know, and it was nothing for him because he's handy, like any contractor or inspector or builder or even investor. They usually are ready to take on big projects, and they just want to know what they got, and they don't need inspectors.
But when y'all are talking about these inspectors, are you saying
Thanks so much.
for the
Back on your
CO for
cruise.
the house,
Hey, yeah,
will they go in and
thanks,
just look
thanks.
at everything?
Sorry.
Is that what he's talking about?
The county inspector comes in, and they
But
check
at
a
the
dozen
CO,
things.
at the end?
At the end, the
But now
CO, yeah,
what
sure,
about,
thank you.
what
Roger.
about each one of those mechanical or things are checked individually too?
That's right, they are checked individually. He
So
is the
shouldn't they
main,
catch stuff there
Not
first?
You know-
necessarily.
not
Not
necessarily.
necessarily.
Just checking,
The
just
thing
asking.
about it, you know, on a new construction, it's checked at points along the way to give the builder approval to continue to the
Right.
next step. In the final process, I mean, it's gone through so various stages, and the inspector, he has hot spots that he's looking for. And if everything passes from what his perspective is, then he'll give the builder the go-ahead, and then he'll issue back to the municipality to allow for the CO. Most of what we see and find are not things that would be detrimental to a CO, but they are conditional issues, and they're potential safety-related issues that the homeowner may find or be an issue several years down the road. I mean, it is surprising. I mean, I would rather look at a house built 10 years ago than look at a brand new house today, because a brand new house today takes so much time. I'm looking at every receptacle 3 times. I'm checking it for wiring continuity, I'm checking it for tamper-proof resistance, and then I'm checking it for AFCI standards. I'm looking at all 3 of those things in place. He's not going to do that. I mean, and invariably, every new house that I go to, I'll find at least one receptacle that's got a wiring issue to it, a wiring continuity issue to it, and I'll find one that fails in a tamper resistance requirement. I mean, and it's just that one receptacle that for whatever reason a year later the baby sticks something in there and, you know, get bit. So-
And in the structure, I go in an attic on truss roof
Oh, yeah.
systems. I'd
Cracks.
say 90% of the time I will find a broken truss, a broken plate, a broken
Is that
something.
right?
Really?
90% of the time on new construction, there's just not enough eyes on it. The guy's putting them up, oh, that's broke, oh, we'll get it later. And they keep going, and they forget, they go lunch.
Yeah.
And,
Or they do something else that's relatively dumb. They'll come back and they'll sister another board on it.
right.
Okay, that may be okay, but when you break a truss system, an engineered truss system, it has to have an engineering letter for the correction. And that has to be there. And if it's not there, then, I mean, it's our due diligence to let the buyer know that, this should be in place. He has to provide you evidence that the repair work was done to the code standards, and that's in the code.
Oh, another question I have.
Yeah.
On that home inspection I was doing, that ranch slab house we were talking about earlier, there were several things in the inspection report that were like, the house was built that way. Like for instance, in one of those, what do you call that, knee wall door where you go into
Yeah.
that attic
The weather
access,
stripping or something.
whatever.
Yeah.
But when you go in that door, in the bonus room, there was, I don't know what it was, the furnace or something was up there anyway, but there was a picture showing where he couldn't get in there to check it because there wasn't enough room to crawl through.
There's a requirement for working space on any mechanical appliance. But whether it's an electrical
don't
panel
know
or an
what it was,
HVAC system, there is a requirement, there's a code requirement for working space.
But it really had my buyer worried because, but they couldn't do anything about it. I mean, how do you ask the homeowner to fix that? I mean, it passed inspection years ago,
Years ago?
Well, I mean, it was like in the 2000s. I mean, it was like 07 or 04 or something.
To paraphrase, what the code says though is that the opening is supposed to be large enough to allow for the largest piece of equipment to be pulled out of there. So other than that, then that access is supposed to be 22 by 30. Now, if the piece of equipment that's in there is larger than that, then it has to be bigger than that, obviously, right? Depending upon the size of the inspector, I mean,
Right.
I may need a
Right.
garage door to get in there.
But every attic has, if it has the HV system and it has pull down stairs, you can't get that HV out there.
Well, they take it apart in pieces.
Well, there's a size,
Pieces.
size
Size.
limitation on that, on a pull-down staircase. But it has to be able to, because obviously when the new one goes in, you can disassemble the old one, break it down to the point to where it's, it's not functioning. But when the new one goes in, it has to be accessible. And there's a size limitation and requirement for access to the staircase areas. But there is a requirement for working space.
There is.
Now, it may not be a defect, it's just a design issue.
Yeah.
And it was, things get grandfathered in all the time, and most inspectors, and as far as a cover page or summary or something, that's all up to that individual home inspector and how they do that. And I leave mine to defects only, or safety issues. I'll put safety issues. But designs and things that were just, the receptacle works, but it's not GFI's in the garage. I'll put that in the report,
Yeah.
but it's not gonna make the cover, because it works, it works.
Right. That makes sense.
So that's just up to each individual.
I mean, I tell buyers that county inspectors miss stuff all the time.
We miss stuff all the
I
time.
mean, no, but
Also, I mean, we
Yeah,
can't,
but-
we're human, yeah.
county inspect, there's a house, it's, I don't know, 5 miles from here. This is a $458,000 house, 3 years old.
Nice.
The septic permit is for 2 bedrooms because the lot was very restricted. This is actually a 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath fancy ranch on a full unfinished basement. And my clients were wanted me to write an offer on it, but they said, "Is there any way we can find out where the septic field is?" So I went and pulled the septic
Yeah,
permit.
yeah.
So I tell the listing agent, "Oh, I'm sure it's a mistake." And she goes to the seller. She said, "But he's out of town, but he says he's sure it's a mistake." No, the seller knew damn well what he was doing. He could only get a permit for a 2-bedroom house. This is a 300+ neighborhood. So he built a 3-bedroom house with a basement, which he was advertising could be finished out.
There are
Thank you, guys.
ways,
You know,
yeah, thanks for
and
coming,
county didn't
appreciate
pick that
it.
up.
Now, there is ways to fix that, not so expensive, I mean, you don't have to, they have different septic systems that are like aerator systems that actually grind and disperse, and then you can get into much more confined space. So it's just a design of a septic system you could put in.
You know, this is unfixable.